Thank you. I hope you guys had a great time yesterday. Thanks to everybody who came to the dinner at Hot Cat. That was really fun. Sorry some of us had to stand around at tables. They don't take reservations, but I hope you all had a good time. So, this morning we've got some more sessions, a bunch of lightning talks, a couple presentations, and potentially more lightning talks. People, if we can get them done. And then I thought we'd have a little conversation, wrap up, maybe talk about the things you guys did at the Hackfest yesterday. I know some folks actually completed something, which is amazing. So I'd love to hear about that. About 11:30, we've shifted lunch a little earlier, so we'll eat in this room, and then about 12:30 or so we'll start filing out, and we'll carpool over to the offices of Yeti CGI, which is a local software development company that Grand Valley Libraries has partnered with in the past, and it's also in the same building as the GR Makers Makerspace. So we'll talk to both of those groups, kind of about library software partnerships and makerspaces and things like that. That should be about maybe 1 to 2:30 or so, and then we're kind of free after that. So a lot of the planning committee have extra spots in our cars, so you're welcome to carpool with us, especially if you don't have a car, or since we'd be wrapping up at that point, if you have a car, you're welcome to drive yourself over, and then you can kind of head out from there. So, thanks again to Britton for live streaming this. Everybody give him a round of applause. Really appreciate it, because I don't know gigahertz from bandwidths from whatever. So I was really glad that he was able to help us.
Just happy I was able to help.
Yes. So without further ado, this morning we have people who had preferences about the order of the lightning talk. So it's slightly different. We actually have an order. And first up, we're going to have John Fink. Hailing from Canada.
Yay! Represent, John.
I came all the way from Canada here. It was really hard. No, it was like 4 hours. When I speak, I tend to walk around, but the camera, I'm really nervous. So if I go too far out of frame, someone poke me back in the frame.
It's not the end of the world.
Okay, that's fine. And also, if I'm talking and anybody wants to have a point clarified, or I'll actually be asking a little questions too. So hopefully people don't just stare at me when I ask a question. Anyway, I just wrote a Code4Lib journal article that was published 2 days ago. Yeah, I think 2 days ago, on this very thing, which goes into it at a great more, some might say nauseating depth. So if you care about that, after this or during the talk, you can go to journal.code4lib.org and just look for my name. So anyway, I spent most of my life as a Unix sysadmin before I became a librarian, and I still am a Unix sysadmin, more or less. I just have academic freedom and a MLS. So anyway, I spent a long time in basements like a troll with heavy machinery. So I'm not as old as this. This is ENIAC. So first we had these massive machines with lots of little wires plugged into them. Then we had slightly less massive machines with lots of blinking lights. They're pretty though. I wish I could find one of these. Then we had these things which were terrible. VAX. I spent a lot of time on VAX VMS machines, and they were just awful. And then we had IBM PCs, and then we had little tiny computers. Everybody knows, okay. So, last question. Does anyone in library IT, they have their own server infrastructure? You do. So, not very many. Hold them up. Put your hands up again. So, maybe a little less than half. Oh my gosh, okay. So, you go down to your server room, if you dare, and talk to your IT people if you dare, and how big is it? Like, is it in a basement? Is it got like racks? How many things are in the racks? How big is your server room? How big was it a year ago? How big was it 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Has it changed significantly? And it's not rhetorical. Has it changed significantly? So like if you've been there for a long period of time, 10 years ago, 10 years ago, big machines in big racks. 5 years ago, maybe slightly less machines. This is not my server room. I stole this from Flickr. Well, it was Creative Commons. I didn't really steal it. But it is a close approximation of a traditional server room. And I really like this picture because it's got, you can't really see, oh geez. But anyway, on the side it's got a projector, which I like, those little classroom projectors with the transparencies and stuff. Why that's in a server room, I don't know why.
Because it's a basement and they put stuff in there.
It's a basement and they put stuff in there. And a head, like somebody's disembodied. Anyway. So is everybody familiar with what virtualization is? Is anybody not? Like I say virtualization, is anybody like, I don't know what that is? I gave a talk kind of like this a couple years ago or a year ago to a library conference, and I came out and I found out from like 2 or 3 people that they were totally lost when I said virtualization. I just assumed people knew what virtualization was, and I felt terrible. So I want to make sure nobody's lost. If you don't want to admit it, you want to come to me later, or and ask. That's fine too. Don't be embarrassed. So these are traditional virtualization frameworks. Do these look familiar to anybody? KVM, Zen, VirtualBox, VMware, that kind of stuff. This is what we typically think of when we think of virtualization in hardware. What's good about this and what's bad about this? What's good about virtualization as traditionally practiced is that it intends to emulate an entire machine. It tends to emulate processor type. It tends to emulate amount of memory, amount of disk space, what your network throughput is. It really wants to make a whole machine out of another machine. And if you're doing spot-on emulation, like I kind of have a soft spot for old computer emulation and old game console emulation, in which things are wildly different, processors are different, the kind of storage is different. So it tends to make as much of a version of the machine being emulated as possible. What's bad is also what's good. So when I have a large server and I want to make a little tiny, I'll make a tiny Linux server out of it. I'm going to stand right here. I'm going to make a tiny Linux, oh my God, I feel so trapped. A tiny Linux server out of it. I have to tell it how much disk there is. I might run out of disk. I have to tell it how many processors to allocate. I also have to tell it how much memory. Now disk is okay, you can put more disk on it, that's not too bad. But processors and memory are a little harder to do. So every time I make a machine for somebody using one of these virtualizations and I want to give them 2 processors or 2 gigs of memory, that's 2 gigs of memory that's just gone from both the host operating system and anyone else who might come later. So what are containers? So anyone who is a real super nerd, I'm looking at Eric Morgan, maybe someone else could be a real super nerd, might know what a jail is or a troot is. Does anyone really know? Is he going to raise his hand? Do you know?
I'm not going to raise my hand.
Anyway, I have the world's worst laptop. I have a Chromebook, which is okay. I mean, it's not the worst laptop, but it has awful build quality and everything. And I got it because it was very cheap, and I'm very cheap. And you can run in it. It runs Linux, but it just runs a web browser, but you can sort of sleaze into it a version of Linux called a troot, and it runs kind of a version of Ubuntu that mostly works for most things, but is sort of hard to work with, and so that it's a way of sort of not going as far as whole machine emulation, but emulating what we call the operating system layer. This is a bad choice for the background, I guess, because white on white, but Docker is something I got into about a year or so ago, and it is a thing in the Linux kernel called Linux containers plus C groups, which is another thing in the Linux kernel which determines limits on amount of memory and amount of processor time to take up, and something called AUFS, which is a union file system. And that means if I have 2 machines or 2 things using a file system and most of what they're using is the same, only the differences are stored. So rather, if I have 2 machines and 90% of what they're using are identical, I don't have to have 2 gig disks. I can have 1 2 gig disk and slight differences on what the differences are. So you can think of like Git, it stores differences. AUFS is kind of like that. So Docker is kind of like Git plus containers. So it's a virtualization framework that runs on an operating system level. It has things like commits. It has things like these containers. It has like tags and branches, and so it's very, very sort of what I call developer-oriented versus sysadmin-oriented, shall we say? It's very lightweight. Let me just tell a story. I used to have a desktop from 2007, and I only got rid of it early last year, 2013. And I used to run Vagrant VirtualBox images on it. I could run maybe 2 before things would get cranky and sort of fall over. And I was like, oh, what's this Docker thing? And I ran 40 of these equivalent Docker virtual machines, as you were, that I ran 40 and I got bored and I gave up. I just thought, how many can I spawn before things start getting kind of terrible? And then it just sort of goes on and on. They're repeatable. So my development workflow is, I work a lot in Ruby, so I have one virtual machine which has a Ruby sort of environment in it, and I can use it, and then I can use it again for another thing, and again and again and again, and sort of repeat them, and I can have 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 of these containers all running at once. And it's so fast. Vagrant, when I spun it up, oh god, so fast. When I spun it up, it would take like, does anyone do a lot of work with Vagrant and VirtualBox in developing? Nobody? Oh my god, okay. Well, it takes like a minute to come up, at least on my awful machine, and it was like waiting and waiting in a minute, and you get really bored, and you're like, okay, hurry up, hurry up. So these take about a half second to a second to instantiate. They're very, very fast. And I put that in there because I took a picture of this, and I like to use this slide. I found it, I don't know, somewhere in my grocery store. And it's just because it's so fast, it's repeatable. I can just go bam and do it, bam and do it. So I like to think of it as lazy. Also, because the theme is JSON, blink tags don't work anymore. I'm not an HTML guy, so I only found this out maybe 6 months ago that people can't use blink anymore. That's true, right? I'm looking at it. So I had to figure out a way to actually put tags in this, which is like ampersand LT semicolon. That doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, so when you query these containers about what information they have, they return it in JSON. So I just thought I would work into the theme of the conference, which is JSON everywhere. So it's one workflow from dev to production, which means I make a box, I'm messing around with it, I develop a Rails application, it works well in the container, I can take that exact thing and push it to whatever machine I want to, and it just runs exactly the same way. It's completely duplicated. Do you have any questions?
No, wait a minute now. You make a container.
Yes.
The container has, say, a cool environment on it that helps you develop Ruby stuff.
Yes, or whatever. It doesn't have to be Ruby, that's just what I do.
Everything works great, wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you really expect to be able to just pick up your Ruby
Yes.
cool application
Yes.
and dump it someplace else
Yes.
and not understand that it's going to conflict with some
It
sort
won't.
of Perl library?
No.
or some sort of
These are all
C library?
isolated environments. So yeah, it does not conflict with anything on the host system. You push it up, you run it, it runs exactly the same way it runs on your laptop.
So
or
I have
whatever
one
else.
application, and I just have a bazillion virtual machines, just as one run application all by themselves on one little machine.
Yeah. And that is my contact information and my slide deck. And I'm happy to run through and show people exactly how this works with my WordPress example, and it will probably be much clearer to understand than me just sitting up here ranting. Any questions other than the one that was just asked? You can ask another one too. Okay, well thank you very much.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. For those of you who I didn't get a chance to meet yesterday, I'm Kristen Meyer, and I'm the User Experience Manager at the Maritima Pew Library at GVSU. And chances are, if you're in this room, you've probably done some user experience research. So you've developed something, and chances are you built a prototype, and you tested it with your users, and based on what you observed, you tweaked and you made it better. Well, all of those same methods and processes that you've used to make your digital products and services better can also be applied to all kinds of things throughout your library to make just your library in general better. And that's really, I think, really important because we know that the total user experience, so what people really think and feel about your library, is sort of like the total sum of everything that they've ever encountered and experienced with your library. So it's all of those touch points. So of course, every time they visit the library website and search for something on the catalog, it's all of that, but it's also every time they come into the physical space and every time they interact with staff members and the messages that they see in library communication. It's a combination of all of that. So all of you as sort of champions of user experience and you're knowledgeable of about user experience, you're in this great position to educate your colleagues and encourage everyone in your library to be doing user experience with all kinds of different things. So I just thought I would share a few of the sort of other user experience projects that we've been working on. So first of all, we collect a lot of information about how our users use our physical space. And so specifically, our service desk students walk around each hour and they use a simple Google form on iPads and they collect information about how people use the space. And of course, they look to help people, and the rooms actually serve multiple purposes. But then what we do is they track things like how full each space is and how noisy it is, and whether or not people were studying in groups or studying alone, or that together alone factor, what furniture was being heavily used, what furniture wasn't being used at all, how many people were using the study rooms, were they using the technology in the study room. All of that information gives us kind of a little bit better understanding of our users and sort of maybe some of their needs. And it also is really useful when we look at policy and when we get complaints. We sort of are able to see, was something sort of an isolated instance, or can we actually see that trend in the data? So, for example, when we open the new library, as many of you who were on the tour yesterday know, we sort of have not very much signage in the building, but we have sort of these subtle cues built into the design for things like which spaces are should be noisy and which spaces were sort of meant for quiet study. And we didn't know, so we opened and we thought, are these subtle cues enough? Or do we need to have a sign that says, something better than this is the quiet area, or you can be loud here? But we didn't really know. But we collected this data, and then what we saw is that, hey, we have a year of this data, and guess what? Users are pretty much acting the same way that we designed the building for. So we don't have a problem. We don't need to give our users any additional need or any additional cues. Another thing that we've been studying is wayfinding in the building. So we sort of wanted to update the content of our digital displays, but one of our questions was, are these displays conducive to use as a wayfinding tool? So we had to just study wayfinding in general. So we had to see, is wayfinding a problem in our building? So do people have trouble finding the bathrooms? And if it is problematic, where do they get stuck? Where are their frustration points? And then what could we do to eliminate those? And so we actually trained some of our student workers to do wayfinding usability tests. So we gave just random students particular tasks. So we asked them to find a particular room, or to locate a book, or to find a person or an office. And then we recorded, did they have trouble finding that? Where did they get stuck? Where were their frustration points? Where did they look for help? And then we'll be able to use all of that information to create a recommendation to improve wayfinding in our building. The final project I'll talk about has to do with notices. So if you think about it, we interact a lot with that's a big touch point for users. We send out these circulation notices all of the time. So the happy notice that, hey, your book that you put on hold has arrived. And then the not so happy notices, like my overdue notice here. Although it's totally legit. If you look at my titles that are overdue, they're all about, user experience. So. But if you think about it, those notices, people, that's an interaction that users have with the library. And it had been a long time since we had really evaluated the tone and the content of those notices. But instead of just having one person or a team of people just sort of rewrite the language, we actually did tone audits with people. So we devised 3 different style types, and then we did random interviews with people, and we sat people down and we said, okay, given this scenario, read through these 3 emails and tell us which you would prefer and why. And of course the why is where we got all of that really good content. And then of course in the instance of the overdue and billing notices, we also said, which would actually motivate you to return your item, which we did discover that contrary to popular library belief, meaner is not always more motivating. So, and that information that we collected, we sort of had a hypothesis that, we think users will really, one particular tone style will resonate with our users. And for the most part, our hypothesis was correct, but by doing that tone audit, we really heard how different elements of the different styles resonated with users, and we were able to sort of have this combined style that we'll use as a guide when we rewrite all of the many notices we send out. So in conclusion, I don't know if any of you have ever watched the Kid President videos. I'm a big fan of Kid President. And every time he finishes his film, he leaves his viewers with the challenge to be more awesome. And I have that on my whiteboard in my office. And I think the best part about doing user experience is that we always have the opportunity to make the library more awesome. So thanks. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Do you plan to share any of the user experience data that you've collected or the findings as you develop new language for stuff? Do you plan to share that kind of stuff?
Yeah, definitely. So right now, a lot of these things are kind of new, so we've sort of like are 3/4 of the way done with the projects, but definitely, I think even sharing data with just our internal audience is so important, and people just inside our library are so interested, but we'll definitely share it externally too. Yeah.
So like when you do the tone audit, what's the number of different students you outreach to do this research with, so you feel like now we can make a decision?
Yeah, you know, for this particular one, we did about 25 students. And what we did is we didn't have an exact number, that we didn't really have a target originally in mind. We thought somewhere, well, we kind of guessed, let's see, do 20 people and see. And then we started to see patterns in what answers people were giving us. And so we felt pretty comfortable that we had it. But yeah, great question.
What's cool is that you didn't do it necessarily against software, but you did these focus groups, interviews, usability studies against all the different types, well, many of the different services that you can find in libraries.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And sort of to follow up on the first question about sharing stuff. So Kristen, when she started, her and I started working really closely at collaborating on a lot of the info. I started to do digital UX and she kind of does physical UX, but there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
Especially like the email rewrites that have been something on my to-do list for years. Every time I did an overdue, I'd be like, oh, rewrite those. But so we started. We were sort of inspired by what MailChimp did, and we have an Evernote notebook that we use to sort of just dump all kinds of user data. So we have all our Google Analytics reports every week dumped in there. We put in all the questions put in from Analytics and other different things, and we give anyone in the library access to that Evernote notebook who wants it, so they can go in and look at the raw data. But we also do a lot of reporting in our own communication with the library about the type of statistics and where we find stuff. So that's been really useful to sort of balance that sort of raw data that is useful to other people in the library with sort of sharing the data, but kind of keeping the more private aspects of some of the data that we collect from the community. And there's a bunch of info on that on my website on how we do some of that.
Thanks, Dan. Any other questions? All right, well, thanks.
Help me out. You know, I'll tell you, I have great views, but late for us.
Yes.
Look it up.
The VGA switch. There we go. For step 2. Ah, there we go. It's happy. Alright, so I'm John Gorman, if you've forgotten yesterday already. Back, John. So I started playing around with something. This is actually a personal project. I'm not using any of my actual time in the library on this. But I've been wanting to learn a little bit more about some of the like NoSQL type stuff, and especially graph databases. I've always been kind of interested in like every few years I play around with the graph database and it's slow, clunky, and hard to use, and I just kind of forget about it. However, about 2 weeks ago maybe, I started playing around with Neo4j, and it's really fast, really easy to install, and I've been having fun with it. So I thought, it's always bothered me a bit that we have these library catalogs and so many records with table of contents, but you can't really do much with the actual like short story stuff. You can search for a book that contains a known item, a known short story, but it's really hard to say something like, well, I want to find out all the other people who were published in a short story collection with Stephen King. And so that's my goal. I'm not there yet. I've only done this like for 2 weeks, but it's actually going surprisingly fast with a little effort. So what I've been playing around with is there's a massive dump of the Library of Congress records from a few years ago. You go look on Internet Archive for Scribio 2007, you'll find it. It has essentially the entire Library of Congress collection at that point. And it's fun to play around with, 26 very big files. So what I started doing, this is just to kind of make sure everything's working, is I first convert them all to UTF-8 instead of Merc-8, so my browser doesn't spew forth junk. And right now I'm doing a two-step process where I run a script to filter through some of those records, and it actually does 3 things. It kicks out anything that's pretty likely not to have a short story. It'll accept anything that's very likely to have a short story, which at this point, I'll explain the criteria in a second. So automatic reject. Lots of things that can possibly reject it. If there's no content notes, I don't care about it. And honestly, I can only read English fluently, so I'm only concerned at this point about English short stories. I'm sorry if you're a French speaker or a Spanish speaker or anything else. You can change those fields. And then there's some other things that I was playing around with the collection. I found there's this Western publisher that like released a ton of stuff that for some reason the Library of Congress has. And they're all pretty much, they would print like a bunch of individual novels, and the Library of Congress would buy their like, omnibus 3 of the Great Western Trio, things like that. So they had a couple common recurring strings. I just kicked those out. The automatic accept is unfortunately pretty rare, but every once in a while there's stuff in the Merc record that will actually indicate it's a collection of short story. I played around with the idea of also automatically accepting if it had some of the phrasing, but I haven't found any phrasing that I really trust yet. So I was thinking like maybe and other stories might be one. I just don't want to accidentally like start pulling in nonfiction stuff. There's almost no authority control. That's one caveat. I just kind of treat work is represented by its title. That means if you have 2 short stories with the same name right now, they're considered the same thing. But, so that's not the greatest, but for now, it at least I can tell if things are mostly working. Like I'm saying, there's some weird things. If you go and download my scripts and run them against your own Merc collection, you might run into some weird things, because I'm pretty much assuming things like the bib IDs are in order for the import process, and I'll show you why in a second. But hopefully I'll be doing more tweaking with this as I get a chance. The GitHub is there. I'll post it on the wiki. But what does this actually look like? I'm sure you're all dying to find out. Can you read that, everyone? Yeah. Good? No? Do I need to bump it up? A little?
Sure.
Alright.
Pick it up one.
What? Give me a sec.
I think Randy just asked you to bump it up to 11.
There's 11. But, so, I mentioned that filter Merc records. I'm doing something dangerous here. I don't think I've actually even looked at this for the collection, so hopefully it won't bomb out on the first record. There are still some things I'm kind of working with Unicode issues, even after the conversion. Alright, so you see there's a bunch of automatic rejects. this is one of the cases where it sees the table of content, it doesn't have anything actually like in a fixed field or anything that will say this for sure is a short story collection. So it just throws it to me for now, and I'm not doing this in a great scientific way. I'm mostly kind of going, that looks reasonable. I hit the Y key, it keeps going. Yeah, it looks reasonable, right? And then if say, and see there's the one phrase I've been considering adding, and other stories seems to be a popular way to indicate. But say now like the dog really wants to go out for a walk, I can just hit stop. And it stops, it saved my place so I can start reprocessing this batch again. And it's all been saving it to a file called short story records merc. And then so I'm not going to bother with the actual import command because all that does is just yank in any records that I filtered out. And it's all it is a bunch of text scrolling right now. But you might be interested in actually seeing what this looks like. Now you can query against this as an API, so just like connecting to any database, but it has this really nice console for playing around with your queries, making sure that right. And I'm really the indexing the query language is called Cypher, C-Y-P-H-E-R. And if you go to the Neo4j site, you'll see a lot about it. But I'm starting to really dig it. I still occasionally will start typing SQL instead, but my brain is getting there. So let's do something that's going to be pretty. I got a couple things saved here. And what this is essentially doing is it's matching works that are contained in books. And this is all part of the I can't talk today. The ingest process. The ingest process, basically what I do is I take the 245, that becomes the title, that's a book node. And then the short stories I kind of parse out from the 505 contents, and then parse out the title and then the author. Title becomes a work node, and author becomes a person node. And then what you can do is add relationships. I'll show some of the code in a second, but first I'll show the pretty pictures. This is a nice visual view. Unfortunately, decided to center in a very strange spot. Always kind of gamble here. Let's go to full screen mode. But so this is just a query. What this query does is looking for anything where there's a short story title that appears in more than one book. So right here, this is the short story, and it's contained in Conjure Tales and Quiverful Tales. And you can even have series of things, so I could even do something like an author who's connected to this work. What other works and authors are they connected to? So essentially the example they give when you start playing around the Neo4j database is the Kevin Bacon problem. So they have a nice dump of several movies and examples of all the queries you can do to get how many degrees away from Kevin Bacon somebody is and things like this. In a similar sense, I can do something like, how many degrees are you from Stephen King? In theory, I'm still tweaking a little bit on parsing out some of the responsibility tags. And the code's pretty simple. I'm using a library called Neo4p. Let's look at the actual code for this. And it's ugly code. I will admit that right away. But it's pretty straight. Well, I think it's fairly straightforward. I've got a lot of setup stuff here. But essentially I'm iterating through the batch. If there's something in the merge batch, this is just, if there's something there, it just skips it. If there's an error, it doesn't even bother handling with this because all I want now is like a decent enough sample size to play around with. But essentially here's kind of the syntax. for this library, and it seems to be a pretty common way that most of the libraries I've seen for Neo4j do it. You just make a new node. In this case, it's a book node. This is kind of the properties of it. There's ways to basically do the same thing with JSON as an input to Neo4j, but this is just a Perl hash. And then so you can see I'm taking as a property the library context, the 001 bib ID field, title. This I'm probably gonna get rid of these two fields. Label is essentially just a big index, which makes it easier to do some of the queries. So if I want to restrict a search for a type of node to just book, I can basically hit this index. And so the nice thing is I can just divide the record up into whatever nodes I want. And then you see here the relate to, I add the relation, that's it. And then the graphing database takes care of all the rest, and you can start doing some of those really fun queries. And honestly, I just like seeing all the pretty pictures that come up. It's very interesting if you do I have that one? I probably forgot to save that one. I had one when I was playing with it for a little bit where I managed let's see if I have. Oh, I'm not seeing it. I must not have saved it. At one point what I did was, just out of curiosity, I found all the short stories that were connected to the work but not any other work. And so it looked like a little flower field, because you would see some collections that had 4 nodes coming off of it. You would see some collections like some insane huge volume of 20. But so I'm hoping to play with this more. But if you ever want to try graphing things, Neo4j, definitely recommend it. Any questions?
Have you thought of any other applications besides short stories?
Actually, yes. One thing I want to play around with, but it is from a very different perspective, is one thing we have a constant issue with from a system admin side is like AD groups and permissions and things like that. And like querying AD is incredibly slow. I don't know why, but it is. My thought is at least maybe for some permissions and groups inside the library to make it easier for people to see who they're giving permission for what, to just put it into this as a tool instead of trying to get. I haven't found any good tools for AD that I like for end users. There's all this stuff that just is information overload, but with this I could just have these employees belong to this group, who belong to this group, and if you want, them to have access to parts of the file server web content, just stick them here. So that's one other application for Neo4j I'm really considering.
Yeah, how big were your 26 very large files?
That's a good question. Oh shoot, I don't have them here. If you go to the Internet Archive, I think it might have a summary. Oops. Firefox. And I have to type while people are watching me. I'm gonna have more coffee after this. But if you go to here's what I was talking about. And now I haven't processed all of those yet. I've just been processing small samples of them. I think I have about 1,000 books in the collection right now.
Okay.
Partially too because I was afraid of trying to put all that in on my laptop and then showing it to you guys. So far, I've not seen any slowdown yet. Do they have a summary here?
Okay.
They're about 200 megs each.
Okay.
Yeah. No grant. Well, except for that little trailing. They're in batches of, I think, 250,000, I want to say. And I think I pretty much processed just like the first batch. And there's not that many short story collections that get pulled out of it. Because I'm guessing the fiction section in Library of Congress is probably not as big as the non-fiction, I would hope. Any other questions? Thanks. I'll clear the way for next lightning talk. As I mentioned before, the GitHub, it should be on the wiki page as well. So if you're curious, you can go to the Code4Lib Midwest, and then you'll see a link there. And if not, I'm adding in like 2 minutes.
Okay, what button do I press to make this screen come on? Nope, maybe. Oh, cool. Okay, that worked. Okay, hi everyone. You saw me yesterday. My name is still Cole Hudson, and it has not changed. And I still work for Wayne State University. That has not changed either. Thank you. I'm pleased to. Okay. So with that introduction, now I get to talk a bit about how we decided to make our bookshelves a little bit more browsable, at least virtually. So what we did was we took some code fair and square and modified it for our purposes. So this kind of represents what happened. Our science and engineering library, we decided last year that it was going to close down, and the collections that we had housed in there, well, people still need to be able to see them somehow. And if your library is closed and it still has books in it, it's hard to go and browse those books. So, we had to have some way to stay open, yet, be closed. So the way you do that is, well, you keep the building closed and you make a shelf viewer that allows people to see those shelves virtually. And that's what we did. We used some code from Harvard. It's called Stack View. You might have seen it implemented in the DPLA. It came out a couple of years ago, and it's a great bit of code. And what it basically does is you hook it up to some type of backend. They have ones built for Amazon, Google Books, DPLA, OCLC WorldCat. And when you do that, what you can do is you can run a keyword search, and it'll bring back your results in the form of books. And that was good and all. It gave us our framework, but we had a couple of things we had to work on. One, it didn't have a connection to our catalog, so we had to build a connection using the venerable, let's call it, Z3950 protocol, and as well as get it to figure out a way to actually be able to browse the books. If you do a keyword search on otters and it brings you back all the books about otters, well, you don't really have a bookshelf that really represents that. You might have books from over here and over there and over there, and that's not really a bookshelf that actually physically represents anything that you can see. So we're looking to be able to, you give it a book and it'll show you all the books around it. So someone who was interested in browsing the stacks that were in our former science and engineering library could find a book and kind of look around. And so we had to build that kind of connection to it, to build in that browsability function. So we took this code here and we did some lovely changes, which, oh, hey, cool. The picture actually shows up in my screen. It wasn't showing up. And we flipped things around, did some color coding. And we have something called Wayne State University Library Stack View. What it does is you give it a call number, and it finds that book. It centers around the book that you looked for, and it gives you all the results on the shelf that's before it and after it. Now there's a bit of fudging here, because when we hit our catalog, we actually are just pulling all the books around this result, regardless of whether or not it's in our science and engineering library or not. So sometimes you'll have a book that's in there, and that's actually from our undergraduate library, but it's close-ish, you know. And that's the important thing. It's getting you all the books that are basically around the thing you're looking for. So you can still browse. We added some functionality too after our first iteration. Our second iteration included if things are actually checked out, where they're actually located. And more importantly, if you can go and find a copy on Google Books, because like everyone else, sometimes you want to look at a book and usually you just want to find a section of the book, find that section and quote it if you're writing paper. So we did that. And here's some of the technologies it uses. It uses some lovely Z3950. I might be a little bit sarcastic in that because I spent a good few, 3, 4, 5 months working with that, and it has its own fun times. It's built with PHP because the Harvard code comes with PHP. It's built around PHP and JavaScript. So it uses the PHP Yaz toolkit client, which allows you to interact with a Z3950 server. So if you have a catalog, you usually have a Z3950, you can plug it right in. And this is the client, one client you could use. And then on the front end, all that styling we did was done by our front end specialist who made it look lovely with some jQuery and modern HTML and CSS stylings. And basically, it used stack views display. So let's get to a link. So what happens is someone will go and search for a book in our search box, and they'll come back with a list of results. And if you look in the books and media, you can see that yes, we do indeed enjoy our Hobbit. And we have 3 copies right here and 31 more to look at. Well, there is a button here that says see on shelf, which checks to see if we have a Library of Congress call number, which is what it's looking for. And we can go and actually look at the book. So we click on see on shelf, and this is our stack view shelf viewer we built. And as you can see, what it's done is it's keyed off that call number, which is right here, and it's found all of the results before and after it. You can also look at the catalog record if you want, as well as, well, I think this one actually has, yep, okay, so there's some Google Book action, and I believe there's nothing on Open Library for this. Nope. And if you are really interested in browsing stacks, you can keep on browsing and look at more and more of your physical shelves. Which, as I said, oh, and there's a bug. And as you click on different books, it highlights the book you're on, it tells you what catalog, where the catalog record is, and where it's available.
Yay.
Yay! And questions.
I'm curious about a couple of the choices you made that's different than the Harvard book view. And sort of a corollary question will be, have you talked to any users about the decisions you made and what they think of it? But first, can you talk a little about the reason that you switched from the vertical view to back to the shelf?
Sure. The feedback we'd gotten with the vertical view was I have to twist my head every time to see what the book is.
Really?
Yeah, they look at it and go, I don't know which way is left and right, because they think of a bookshelf that is, I'm looking at a series of books like this, and so when they're looking that way, the feedback we got was they didn't like that.
Huh, so even though you have to tip your head at a normal
Yeah, even though you have to tip your head to look at the shelf that's displayed this way, that we have it displayed, yeah. So that's why we had to kind of compromise also by having that right there, so you can actually see the book as opposed to reading the title. Because yeah, there is now this title is twisted on its head as opposed to with Harvard's it was a little bit left and right. So it is more of the left is more of the browsing function rather than reading the title. Yeah. What else?
good time is the width of the book on your screen to correlate to the size number of pages?
Yes.
Whoa, fancy.
Yep, that's all Harvard's doing. I just plunked in the numbers. Oh, and since the word of the day is JSON, yes, indeed, it does go and bash some mark into JSON, and that's what Harvard Stack View wants. And so yeah, runs on JSON.
Cole, if you have electronic book that has a class number, will it appear in the shelf?
If it had some type of right now we are dealing with Library of Congress, so if it did have a Library of Congress call number, then yes, it would. Ours currently don't, so we don't have that problem.
Well, for us it wouldn't be a problem. That's the thing, is people order more
That'd be a
electronic
great
books.
thing then.
They want to be able to, they
Heck
want to be
yeah.
able to see what electronic books we have as well as the physical books.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah.
I'm curious about so you said that it's showing all the books that have that LC call number. Did you find, was there a technical hurdle to filtering to a particular library? Our issue is that all of our ebooks actually have call numbers, and so we've talked about doing this, but there's sort of the case that we do or don't. Some people want the ebooks to show up, some people don't want the ebooks to show up. So we want things just in the crane, not in the crane, so figuring that limitation has to be difficult.
Yeah, we haven't gotten any feedback in terms of, I was expecting to see an ebook here, and why isn't it there? Or there's an ebook there, that's not on the shelf. Presumably, when we get that complaint, we'll figure out appropriate response.
This would be an interesting fork, would be to facet it on particular subject sections, so that you could emulate real-world library distinctions, or on formats, and then have it sort of branch off that way. Once you tackle the project, I think.
Yeah.
What
Yes.
kind of usage have you seen? I know browsability is really popular as a concept, but in the real world, is it actually being used by users?
Well, it's fairly new, so it's hard to. I haven't looked at it recently. It's been used, but it's kind of what I expected. So one of the reasons sometimes you close a library is because usage goes down. So with the Science and Engineering Library, usage went down, and the response we'd gotten back was, I still want to browse the books, even though I don't go and actually ever browse the books.
This is like a virtual blankie for
Yeah.
Department of Number Effect.
So, kind of seeding it the way we have with putting it into our search results, perhaps pushes people to click the button whether or not they want to. They're kind of curious, why is this C on shelf jazz? But we'll see. And if you want to mess with it, it is on GitHub. And basically, if you have a Z3950 connection server and it uses search and scan, you need the scan service. So I know some Voyager doesn't do that. Then you should be able to connect it up, usually. So yeah, any other questions?
So that's real-time access to Calum. You don't download it.
Real-time access. And I've hooked it up to others, the Z3950s that you find on index data, and it does work. So it's not just a Wayne State.
So what happens if the books are gone? Do you have a placeholder that's put in there? So let's say somebody does a search.
And it's like missing or just
Checked out, missing. What do you have a placeholder? Like a different color, so it says, hey, this is not here.
What we have currently is, if you mouse over, this little green light will change to orange if it says missing or checked out. This thing right there, that green thing right there, that'll change color.
That's awkward. So you don't have anything that actually on the shelf stack so the person could look at it. So like if I was walking in PK with my iPad and I was doing this, I couldn't see on on my iPad which books were out just by color code. I'd have to actually mouse over it or do something to interact with it.
Yeah, pretty much. Anything else? Cool. Thank you.
Emulate some kind of browser.
Yeah, I was like,
Let me just do it this way.
Could have been a lot worse.
that's true. It's very true.
Man, I said that right. Don't go.
Sounds like a challenge. It just says North American.
Oh, that's better.
Jeez. Okay. As other people said, just like yesterday, I'm still Allison. And you just get one slide today, and some of you might know that at the University of Waterloo, we're actually really famous for our Canada geese. They really like to hang out on our campus, and when Maclean's does a student survey, that's actually one of the things Maclean's magazine will get from students. They'll be warning other students sometimes about the vicious geese on Waterloo campus. So I thought I'd give you a nicest little picture to look at while I'm talking to of some of the baby geese over at Waterloo Park. So a few years ago at Code4Lib North at McMaster, I talked a little bit about getting staff to help with software testing, but I was focused on the actual script, so what we actually gave them a list of things to test. And I thought I would just talk a few minutes about kind of why you'd want to involve your library staff in your testing and some things to think about. So I don't have my cataloger hat on today. I have my discovery layer chair of the team hat on. So I'm a chair of the Primo team for our consortium. And when we first started implementing, usually it's the Primo team that did a lot of the testing for everything. Obviously we put things out in beta for the staff, but we had the training in the software. We knew it really well. We knew kind of what bugs existed, how to kind of break the system. But as we went along, we started to get more of our library staff involved if we had, especially if it was a whole version upgrade, but even a really large service pack, we would get them to help out. And one of the reasons I think it's useful to have them do that, and this could be software that you've created or just software that you've inherited, is to get that staff engagement, because I think sometimes in libraries we have this software and it's kind of, we feel like it's been imposed on us. We might not have chosen it might not have been the tool we preferred, and so it's just something, people refer to me as like the Primo lady or something. It's like, well, no, it's not actually my software, it's our software, we're all using, Primo. So getting them involved in testing kind of, I think helps a little bit with the ownership. You get to know the product really well, you can contribute some feedback to the Primo team, in our case, what's working, what's not. And for staff that don't use the discovery layer every day, they don't know it as well, it actually kind of reminds them that it's there, they can use it so that when they do finally end up on the circulation desk or the reference desk, they're helping students. They might actually remember something from when they were testing that helps them out with their job. So staff engagement, I think, is a really good reason to do it. And as John mentioned yesterday, your users, now I know this isn't your final end user, staff's just one section of users, but your users can find things that are wrong. And partly because they do things differently than the people who really, really know the software. So if Xlevers puts out a new feature in Primo, I kind of read it, I know exactly how that's kind of supposed to work, and I can try to break it, but I'm probably using Primo the way that Xlevers expects me to use it because I know the software really well. The other staff users, they're going to do also, if I just say to them something like place a hold, they might go about that in a whole different way than I would go about doing that, so they're going to find things that I've never thought possible. We were talking yesterday, I think at lunch, about people copying and pasting from a website and throwing it into the search box, and the fact that apostrophes often don't work properly if they've just copy and pasted a citation. Again, when I'm just testing software, I'm typing in test searches, I might even type in a title, but I probably haven't copy and pasted from somewhere. So just even having people use the system the way they did is really helpful. Also, from our point of view, it actually, as much as it's uncomfortable to uncover some of the pain points in the software that you're responsible for, it's actually a really good way. So even if something's not actually broken, in the sense that the vendor would say that, yes, that's a defect, you do kind of find out where people are struggling. I might have given them some tasks to do, and they couldn't figure out how to do it. So that's kind of a good clue that maybe something's wrong there. You need some sort of tool tip, or you get comments back like, yeah, I got to it, but it was 5 clicks, and
that sort of thing. So that's been useful also. And along that lines, we've also found over the last few years it's a really good training opportunity, because now you discover all the things that the staff do not know about the particular software. So we've had Primo, for example, since 2009, and even now if I have people test, they'll say something like, oh, you can't search by ISBN. And I think, yes, you can. Just put it in the box, hit enter, it works. Well, they're looking for an ISBN drop-down in your choices of searches. So they haven't just tried, and maybe a student user, if they were going to search for an ISBN for some reason, would maybe just put it in the box. But the staff are used to that drop down in Web Voyage for that. So you have a chance to say, oh, just type it in. Pretty much type anything in. I think pretty much everything's indexed. Yeah, go for it. Or you'll have people, you'll say add to eShelf because you want to test that, and someone will say, well, I'm not sure how to add more than one thing at a time to eShelf. And so you say, well, actually just click on the titles and they just add as you go and it'll be fine. So it's a good kind of conversation and opportunity to find out where do we might need more user help in terms of our staff who don't use it every day, where we might actually have to give them maybe a refresher or show them how to use it. But as much as I would like them to kind of, just kind of bang away at it and test it and maybe try to break it, one thing to keep in mind is not everybody has that kind of inclination. So if you say, can you test this for me? And they go, so what do you want me to do? Or they might just run one or two searches. I would have in the beginning, before I gave them test scripts, I would say, can you test this for me? And I've already done some testing, so I know things are broken. And I would get this email back, yep, everything's fine. And I was like, oh, okay, I didn't think everything was fine, but you're not finding some things, so I don't know what it is that they're actually doing to test it. So if you are giving a test for people that aren't used to software testing, give them some sort of task list. I usually give them a spreadsheet, and especially if it's a really big service pack or upgrade, I'll have like, do a search, do a multi-words, search, click on a facet, deselect your facet, add to your eShelf, delete it from your eShelf, and actually give them a list of tasks to do. And I always encourage them at the end to then go and do their own testing, which some do, some don't. It also, having a task list, I think, gives them a sense of how long this is going to take, because with staff, their time is valuable. They have lots of things to do. So they want to get a sense of how long is it going to take me, how much time do you want me to put into this. So if you give them a list of tasks, then they can kind of see, oh, this is going to take me half an hour or something like that. And the final thing with that is take results in any format they're willing to give them to you in. So don't put up barriers by saying, well, you have to fill out this spreadsheet, you have to put your comments here, and make sure you put a screenshot here. So if I actually want really good feedback from a good cross-section of staff, I say, preferably fill out this spreadsheet and stick some images in it, but come to my desk, send me an email, send back the spreadsheet, open a Word doc and put stuff in there as you're doing it. However you want to give me your feedback, I will take it. Hopefully not one email at a time as you find everything, but again, I will take that too. I can filter it. And also don't assume that your staff know how to use, do screen capture. So if you're going to have people send you stuff back and they don't necessarily give you all the replication steps that we would really like, but at least if they could give you some sort of screen capture of what they're seeing on the screen, it's great. So especially with I work in a consortium, I can't assume that all 3 libraries have Snagit. So I'll say, well, at Waterloo we have Snagit. Don't forget you can do this. If you're on Windows 7, there's a snipping tool. If you're over here, you can use this type of thing. And make sure they kind of know how to give you. Again, because if you have that barrier and the staff kind of feel stupid trying to help you out, they're not going to help you out if they have to ask too many questions. So we found it really useful. We've discovered things that we never would have discovered without this helping it out. And myself, I like doing it too. The systems department, if they're going to be rolling out, I know when they rolled out Windows 7, they want to make sure Voyager modules still work with Windows 7. They'll pick someone in a department to try that out. And I've always liked doing that. So I found that staff actually do, if you ask them, many of them will help them out, but it does help if you actually tell them exactly what it is you need them to do and kind of the time it takes to do it. So that's it.
It's a really great website called, I think it's Kate, I just tweeted it, but it's like Kate, screenshot.org or
you want me to do anything?
Should be okay. Thank you.
I don't know. It's weird because it's like about 45 seconds delayed.
Right. That's weird.
It's what? What? I haven't said anything. Shut up, Matt. God.
Oh, why is it beach balling? Don't beach ball.
Oh.
There you go.
The beach ball of doom.
Is everybody doing all right? Good. Glad to hear it. First, I want to thank Matt and the rest of the Grand Valley folks for putting this on for us. I've had a really great time. I want to give a shout out to you there recording this thing. You've done a great job, and you're so handsome. You could use a haircut, but you're so handsome. My name is Britton Woodman, and I am here to talk about a thing that we tested at University of Michigan Ann Arbor, where I'm from. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. Oh, good, this works. I've been with the U of M Library for 7 years now. Part of my current role as a learning technologies specialist is to develop and find tech tools to make our library operations staff's jobs easier. That's like the circ desks and the stacks offices. And sometimes another school will make my job a lot easier and develop something like this for us, which is what happened to us last year when our head of access services came back from the Access Services Conference or something else with a tool that he saw at North Carolina State University was developed. They developed and they were demoing it, and it's called SUMA. It's they call it a mobile library assessment toolkit, but I call it a great database-driven web app that replaces the old clicker with a tablet. At this point, to use SUMA, you have to have a place to host the web app. I've done a little bit of shell scripting. I know my way around a web hosting account, like just a virtual server kind of thingy, like a shared one. I'm at a point where I enjoy updating and installing new plugins for my WordPress more than I enjoy writing posts for my WordPress. I wasn't even really a stranger to installing a SQL-driven web tool for my library. A few years before this, one of our labs wanted to develop a thing that the reference desk staff in the lab could use to just kind of track the requests that were coming in about how to use the software in the lab and how, so that they could quickly refer back to it if somebody asks out, how do I kern my dissertation in Word or something? But this one was a little bit more complex than that one. There are actually two components to SUMA. The client is developed for mobile browsers like Safari on iOS. I think it would work in Chrome on an Android device too, but we're pretty much an iOS shop. And then there's a server side that collects and crunches the data. Most of the server side actually lives in a directory outside the publicly accessible web directory. So me and my colleague Dave, who if you came to MLA Tech and Trends last year, you might remember Dave and I talking about something totally different. Well, his office and my office are right next to each other. We're part of the same unit. And we each tried, don't want to say we turned it into a competition, but it kind of turned into a little bit of one, just trying to each get it to work in our own web spaces. But it was, like I said, it's a little trickier than getting like WordPress to work. And I quickly surmised we were going to need like a server. But here in library operations, Dave and I are the only people that would dare to mount this sort of thing. We don't really have the privileges to just start up a server. Library IT could potentially support this sort of thing, but generally they're pretty busy maintaining HTTrust and doing a revamp of the library website and summon and things of that nature. They really were not, I didn't even ask them really, because when I asked them for that help with the reference desk tool, they said, well, why don't you use footprints? We already have footprints working. If you've used footprints, you know it's useful, but trying to track quick questions at a walk-up desk is kind of like weeding your front garden with a backhoe using footprints. So I knew I wasn't going to get a lot of help there. So what I did is I borrowed an unused PC from another office, and I used 2 USB flash drives, Kingston like consumer flash drives, one for the installer and one to actually install it on. I started with Ubuntu 13.04, which was the latest one at the time. We were preparing this last summer. I've been a graphical user interface kind of guy, basically, as long as there've been graphical user interfaces on consumer PCs. So I started off trying to install Ubuntu Desktop, and I thought maybe I could just turn on the server components from there. But I could never get it to boot properly off the flash drive. It might have been something I was doing wrong back then. I thought I was following the instructions properly, but I could sort of get it to desktop, but I couldn't really do anything else. So after I tried that twice and didn't get it to work, I re-imaged the installer drive with the alternate Ubuntu installer and just went straight server. And that worked really well. Pretty soon I was at a prompt. This is actually the machine I ran it on. It's just a semi-unused HP desktop machine that was the style at the time. And that red one there is the flash drive that we booted it off. And it actually ran that way for almost a year. So I was concerned at first whether a consumer-grade flash drive would be able to handle constant, writes throughout the day. But it didn't. I didn't really even tweak it that much. So that's good to know. So then it was time to install Suma onto this Ubuntu instance. I followed the instructions pretty carefully. I'll be honest, they have a simple install that requires you to actually know a thing or two about GitHub. And I didn't have time to learn Git, or at least I thought I didn't have time to learn Git. So I just downloaded it and installed it the way I would download and install WordPress, by downloading the zip file and extracting it to the proper spots. The hardest part of getting it to work at this point was going into the config files and making sure the web side knew where the server side was installed in the directories. Since I was the administrator, I could put everything near the top level of the web directory, so it was pretty simple. My biggest enemy, as is almost always the case in situations like this, are file permissions. But again, since I was administrator, it was pretty easy to change them. And things were pretty good until iOS 7 came out. When iOS 7 came out, Apple made some changes, and one of the changes they made in Safari was the WebSQL implementation. WebSQL is the thing that lets a browser hold on to some data for a while, even if you're not directly connected to the network, which is essential when you're going between floors and popping on and off Wi-Fi. It's basically what makes it a mobile app. You don't need a Wi-Fi connection. iOS 7 changed this. To their credit, North Carolina State's developers got a workaround out pretty quickly. And then Apple finally fixed the thing in iOS 7.1. It was a little bit tricky for me to apply updates to Suma because of the way I'd installed it. Again, if you install it from Git, then there's just a Git command you can type. It just brings the latest version into your instance. I didn't do it that way, so I made it a little bit harder for myself. Let's see. What's I going to say? It was easy to patch the server, though. I mean, when Ubuntu made security updates, I just would type, sudo apt-get update, and it was good. I never actually tried to go from 1304 to 1310 because I just kept up with the security updates to 1304. Basically, when I had to make changes to Suma, I would just download the zip file and FTP it over to the server again, and then fix the file permissions in a command line by SSHing in. It's a good idea to set downtime expectations with the people who are using this thing you're testing. It was pretty easy for me because we only do counts 4 times a day in the building. It's open 24 hours, so they go at 8 and at 2 and then at 8 and then 2. So I just make sure they were done with the afternoon count and then say, okay, don't count anything for a while. So it worked out pretty well. I tried to maintain backups like a real sysadmin would. I was especially worried about screwing up applying an update and rendering the whole thing unusual. It was pretty easy to dump the SQL database to a backup because I had phpMyAdmin and that I knew. Backing up the whole system was a little bit tougher nut for me. On the Mac side, I'm a big fan of Carbon Copy Cloner or Super Duper, and I know there's things on the Windows side too. I did a little bit of searching online. I was basically on my own for this. I didn't really feel like asking anybody because if I asked anybody, I knew they'd say, wait, why are you running a server? So I looked around a bit. And found CloneZilla, which is a bootable Linux disk cloner. So I got a disk actually because I didn't want to run out of USB slots. and booted Clonezilla from a disk and duped the flash drive to the other flash drive, and it looked like it worked. The partitions looked like they were there, but I could never get the machine to boot from the backup disk, so I'm glad I never actually had to rely on it. Finally, Suma 1.0 came out. I was a little bit worried about the move from like INI files to YAML files, but it was really pretty needless worry because everything was pretty much in the same spot. And the nice thing is that they kept support for INI files for people who were even more scared than me. So by now we'd used it for several months, about 6 months, and we liked the stats we were seeing, and we knew that we wanted to continue with it. But we were still running it off that box, so there's no redundancy. There was a power outage one weekend that took down the computer, and it didn't come back up until I went back in on Monday and rebooted it, hit the power switch. So it was clear we needed to come up with something more permanent. So we moved to my server, which is what our central IT unit at U of M is calling managed, like virtual private server hosting. We moved it, finally wound up moving it this spring. And originally I was like, so the whole thing's on a flash drive. Do you just want the flash drive? And they're like, no. Give us the SQL database. And I said, okay, here's the SQL database. I just popped in a PHP at my admin and dumped the SQL database. And they said, well, can you give it to us in CSV? And I said, okay, here it is in CSV. Okay, we need each table in CSV. All right, so that was what I did. It was a little bit torturous watching me get it together, but in the end, it worked just fine. In the future, I've talked about this a couple times. I really haven't learned Git, and I've actually seen some stuff yesterday that is inspiring me to actually learn how to use Git, and I'd like to get familiar with it. I've got an account on GitHub already, but I really need to learn it, if nothing else, so I can give back something like this home screen icon that I made, so that when we add it to the home screen on the iPads that our staff use, this is the thing that comes up. I'm sure this would give my VP of Communications conniptions seeing what I did to the block end. But most people I showed it to think it's pretty cute. So I would be happy to take questions, though I can't guarantee I'll be able to answer them. Yeah? Excellent. Thanks, everybody.
It took me a minute to figure out that you're right and how these subtle
What was it for morning
colors?
lightning
I
talks?
was
We
like,
have a
for
couple
some reason,
more.
I was like, oh, he's wearing a
coming
really cute
up.
check shirt. Oh,
Later,
amazing.
maybe a couple more.
Amazing blue.
Yes, a couple more. Okay. But we've got a few longer sessions now. I realized two things that I forgot to mention earlier when I did announcements. One, restrooms are through the door. You may have figured that out because people keep going through that door. And there's a big sign that says restrooms on the window. The second thing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, someone is interested in hosting Code4Lib Midwest next year. Can I say their name out loud?
Just institutions.
In just what? Just the well, that's what I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I can make up names, but Ohio State is interested in hosting CodeLib Midwest next year, so look for that. 2015. There'll probably be more information. Pressure's on. So anyway, so now we're up for some other sessions. Megan, you ready?
Ready.
Okay, I think Megan's going to talk to us about how to do free open source software when you're the only person at your institution working on it. Right?
That is
Okay.
correct.
So is it a self-reminder to get a haircut?
I usually get my hair cut before time, so I just never got around to it.
Are you taking lessons from that, Mr. Fink?
I hate getting haircuts so much. I have no fear of barbers.
So what are you gonna do with the beard? Are you gonna just? Are you gonna put beads in it? That'd be awesome.
You should do the flower beard.
No.
Oh, no. No. I also got it. No. That was just ridiculous. You're not doing the lower group thing, are you? Of course not. Okay. But beads would be cool. Okay. Tenant! Yep. Alright. Dang it. Is that your desktop?
That's my other desktop.
You may have to send me that picture. Okay. Oh, that's good.
Yes. Okay. 7.5. Okay. Yes. Okay. Hi, I'm Megan Kadzia. I'm from Albion College in Albion, Michigan, which is about 2 hours east and south of here. And for reference, I'm one of 6 librarians, including an archivist at my institution. And so I'm going to talk about free and open source software for small libraries. And I'm also including, even if you're in a bigger library, but if you're a small department within a big institution, it can kind of feel the same as being in a small institution. So, how feasible are free open source software projects for small institutions? I think they're not that feasible depending. But how do we make it easier? So, what's attractive about, like, why am I even thinking about this? They're pretty shiny things, and I want them. We all come to these conferences, and we see the cool things people are doing with Islandora and Stack Browse and Hydra installs and all kinds of cool stuff, and it's hard not to be like a shopping list, right? You come home and you're like, okay, I want one of those, and I want one of those, and I want one of those. It feels like good practice. It's a nice way to keep information as open as possible to give back to this community, which gives us all so much. It's less expensive. Everyone's on a budget, and it's nice to not have to pay for licensed, locked down software that you can't really touch. And most of us are kind of idealists. I know I picked this picture for a reason, and I was looking at it this morning, and then I couldn't remember why that was related exactly. Failure? I don't know. But we like to do the information should be as free as possible thing, and so that's, we like this stuff. So at my institution, we're a small school. We have about 1,350 to 1,400 students. And we realized a few years ago, actually I just found out last week, even longer ago than I thought, that we wanted some kind of digital, institutional, repository, whatever the current jargon is for that thing, because in particular, there's a case for the archives as a document retention. We have a lot of stuff in paper in a not super well organized way. They're the kind of documents that should go to the archivist, and some of them make their way there and some of them don't, and they're just in boxes and people's file cabinets sort of all over campus, and people are very protective of their paper documents, and which means that it's hard to get at them if anyone were to, not that anyone really is desperately in need of faculty meeting minutes from 1967, but if they were, they might not be able to get them. We also have, probably a lot of you have in your archives, all kinds of cool old photographs, which are really nice for your campus, like institutional advancement, communications people, when they're writing all the pretty publications, they want all your pictures. Right now, our photographs are not super duper accessible to the folks in that department, and usually the process right now is they write to the archives and they say, hey, we need pictures from basketball games from 1940 to 1945. And the archivist says, cool story, I'll just go dig all those binders out of images that may or may not be on CD for various reasons, and you'll go through and pick ones you want. I'll scan them for you, and then I'll add metadata, and then you'll make 87 local copies for yourself that may or may not have good metadata associated with them. It's not ideal by anyone's definition, because she also can't always drop everything right now to get you all those pictures. So there's lag everywhere, and it stinks. Finally, we have some digitized material that we want to have accessible to campus and the community and the public, like our old student newspapers, and we don't have anywhere to put those where they're easily browsable, searchable, viewable stuff. So, and we're on a budget, and we looked at things like Content-EM and DSpace, and we just didn't really like them that much. We looked at Omeka, but it wasn't really robust enough. Right now, like access, period, would be great, but longer term, preservation would be really nice, and especially for document retention reasons. And Omeka just wasn't gonna cut it, and so we thought, why do a halfway, not as good job when we could get something really awesome. We looked around, Islandora looked really awesome. It's based on Fedora, which is really easy to migrate your data out of, comparatively speaking, and it's really stable, and we really liked that. So, difficulties. So what we discovered is that what we had at our institution, what possibly a lot of people have at their institution, was we didn't have all the different skill sets that we needed, and in some cases we weren't even sure, we didn't know what our unknowns were. Like, we didn't know what skill sets we needed that we didn't have until we started playing with it. And we didn't have the experience in terms of like the judgment to be able to look at a project and say, I can tell just looking at the docs, this is what it's really going to entail. And then, yeah, the documentation does not have necessarily super clear disclaimers if you haven't done something like this before, to say, like, here are all the things that you're going to need to actually do this. So, when we were trying to determine feasibility, things that we tried that were not actually super helpful were benchmarking against other same-sized institutions. Not a lot of other same-sized institutions are really using Islandora, but all that we really know is that they're not doing it. We don't really know why not, and there could be a lot of reasons for that. So it doesn't really tell us a ton of good information. And looking at job titles from teams at larger institutions, if you're at a larger institution, sometimes we don't know, like, do you spend 50% of your time on that, 100% of your time on that? How much of your time is spent doing intense customization, awesome stuff that would be cool to do, but maybe we don't absolutely need to do it? What does your job title even mean? What did you need to be able to do to get your job? Hard to tell. So those things seemed like they would be useful, and I mean, they were better than nothing, but not as useful as one would hope. So we talked to folks at Grinnell, hi Becky, yes. And they were really, really helpful in talking about their own process. They're a slightly bigger institution with us, with more staff than we have. And so what we found is that even being similarly sized, their experience is going to end up being radically different from what ours will be. And then we talked to Michigan State, hi again guys, who were also super, super helpful. They have a whole department that works on their Islandora install. They were very encouraging, and they've always been there for us if we were like, oh, we don't know what's happening. But again, it's like a totally different animal there. And that was, in terms of similarly sized or otherwise local institutions, when we started doing this project about a year ago, as far as we could tell, that was mostly it. And we knew we had some of the skills that we needed, but we thought, well, we're, ambitious, hardworking people. Let's just try it, darn it. So, yeah, that went well. So it turns out that it's tricky to explain responsibly the scope of one of these projects to your administrators, boards of trustees, whoever you need to explain it to, especially in terms of what a timeline might look like, especially if they're maybe a little bit less technical. And it's also difficult to stay on the same page with your IT people. One thing that we discovered is that when we say storage and when our systems and networking IT people say storage, we don't mean the same thing. Or when I say like I need a server, when they say like, well, you have space on the drive, and I'm like, no, I need a server to develop on. And it's hard to, it's easier for me to have that conversation now than it was a year ago, but sometimes definitions are not held in common and it gets a little confusing. Some of the advice is like, well, you have to cultivate a good relationship with IT, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll just go do that. I'm really lucky. I have a really, really good relationship with my IT people, and I recognize that I am extremely lucky. Part of that is because my predecessor started out at my institution in IT and then moved over to the library, and so when I got hired in, they continued to include me in the weekly user services meetings just because they had been doing that. And so yeah, that gave me a huge in with that department. Not everybody has that. We all know campus politics are inscrutable and difficult, and sometimes there's emotional baggage. And so it's not, it's sort of easy to say you need good IT people who will help you, but sometimes that's hard or impossible to get. So that's tricky. So our difficulties really started to crystallize after 3 or 4 months. We went through upwards of 20 installs of the Islandora stack, and when I say installed, I don't mean at the same time, successively. We tried many times and then we failed, and then we said, okay, nuke it, we're starting over using virtual machines. And yeah, we tried a lot, repeatedly, many times. At the last install that we did before we said this isn't gonna work for us to develop here, we had some database configuration issues. So we could ingest a PDF and it would know it was supposed to be part of a collection, but then when you would look at the collection, it didn't know it was supposed to have anything in it. So that was cool. So that told us when we configured the database, we did something bad, but we don't know what it is. We can look at the metadata and see that this little string isn't in there like it's supposed to be, but we don't know why not. So we would have had to, once again, nuke and start from the beginning. We had a lot of difficulty with the documentation, and to be fair, it's hard, it's big documentation, there's a lot of moving parts, and I think the folks who are creating Islandora are working really hard all the time to try and keep the docs good and current and stuff. So it's this is with admiration and respect. But we had difficulty sometimes being clear from an individual document page which version of Islandora the page was relating to. It seemed at that time like there might have been some interlinkage between the two main general release versions, although it could just be because it got confusing and there were many pages, and we tried both versions multiple times to see which one we could get to work. So it could just be that we got confused also, but it was intense. Also, once we started getting Drupal errors after we got through the initial we can get it to install, that documentation is all completely separate somewhere else, which I know I just complained about interlinkage and document confusion, but the difficulty with the Drupal docs is that they're all Drupal only oriented. So if you only need to use Drupal for Islandora, it's hard to figure out what subset of Drupal documentation is really going to be relevant for you. As a side note, one of the things that didn't occur to us that probably should have is that if you don't have really any Drupal experience, maybe this is not a super feasible project for you. So, important safety tip. Also, we had trouble telling what was really a dependency and what wasn't really a dependency. I'm gonna pick on somebody, but again, not like with nothing but respect. So there's a little module chunk thing that's called Took, and talking to Aaron Colley yesterday, it sounds like maybe it really is a dependency. There was a lot of confusion about that. There was somebody in the Google group that was really helpful, who said it was a dependency, but that's the person who wrote it. And when we were going through the docs, it doesn't say like at the beginning in the dependency list that it's required. So there were some people saying it was required, but it wasn't listed right up front. And so we were like, do we need it? Do we not? And sometimes we were hesitant to install it if we didn't need it because we were already having trouble, and we thought if we install more stuff, we're just going to break something. And so that was sort of tricky. That's the only one I can remember. I think there probably are more modules like that floating around there, but it's hard to tell what's a real dependency and what's a strongly recommended and in what order you should install things. So we bailed because we had an uncertain development timeline. We persistently were unable to be very concrete about how long it would take us to develop our project. We felt like we were about 2 days away from a stroke of genius most of the time, which is not really helpful to people who want to know what they can tell the provost about when this might be available. We also, it was, in terms of getting the software off the ground, like before we started to really majorly ingest collections, mostly one of my coworkers in IT and I were the people who were just like sitting down and bashing through command line trying to install this. And we each had maybe 5, maybe 10 hours a week that we could sort of dedicate to this, which is not enough, I think. But they weren't always like 5 overlapping hours every week, which was also not helpful. And so that was just like not, at the end we said, you know what, this isn't gonna, it's not gonna happen. I mean, like it might happen, but we could be all like 87 years old by the time it does. So this brings me to something else, which is a problem, not the dead weight feel. It's not a good feel. So we tended to feel like we were, or I tended to feel like I was a drain on the Google group, because every couple weeks we'd be like, okay, now this is broken. Does anybody know what we should do to fix it? But we didn't feel like we had enough accumulated knowledge to really contribute that much back to the listservs. Everyone knows that feeling of being like that person who's always like, so who wants to help me with this one? I want to be really clear right now that this is my stuff. I would be surprised if no one else deals with it, but I'm not speaking for anybody except for me and myself. But this is really scary and hard about open source software, because all those feelings happen, and so it becomes hard to not feel like the crappy person who's always complaining, but then be sort of afraid to figure out, or not sure of how, if you wanted to contribute back, you might do that. So, about giving back. Becky Yost gave a really awesome talk, or several really awesome talks in the last year about open repositories and open source software and stuff generally. And I can put links to her talks on the wiki because they're really good. They created a consortium with several other small liberal arts schools, finally, to do Islandora, because not everybody had all the skills needed represented at their own institutions. Now there's like 4 or 5 schools that are sort of pooling expertise to get each of their individual installs working properly. And they've also got someone who technically, they started out being an Islandora group, and now they've got someone who's doing Hydra. So, which they're both based on Fedora Open Commons. So, you know, there's some interchangeability, somewhat. So she talked about that. It's a lot of work to just like create a consortium and make that happen, and especially if you're a small consortium, it's a lot of work. So it's not necessarily the ideal solution, but it makes it from we can't do this to we might be able to do this. She also talked about the Mozilla model for contribution, and Jenny Rose Halpern at Code4Lib National this year gave a cool talk about that, so there's a link there. But Mozilla makes it really easy for people to contribute to the Mozilla community in a lot of ways. Again, when you look at the Mozilla page on like contribute back, you can tell like someone did a lot of work to make this possible so that people can contribute back easily. So that is a non-trivial infrastructure creation and maintenance thing. So it's really cool and it's really helpful, but it's also not going to be easy. I think one place that maybe a lot of us could give back more easily is documentation. And I'm going to talk more about that. I know, right? I'm going to talk more about that. So again, hat tip Becky Yost. She talked about there aren't a lot of vendors that will do like spin up an Islandora install for you. If you have money to burn but not staff, and you want to do the shut up and take my money, there's no one to give it to. That is changing. Our happy middle, it's not an ending yet, is we just found a vendor that would do us an Islandora for a price that we could afford. So we are in the process of trying to get our ingests happening, and it turns out that installing Islandora is just the first of many steps, because then you have to look at your metadata and go, shoot. So that's where we are right now. But there's more vendors coming into the market for doing this, so that's really exciting, and that's progress. She also, and I can't remember if she actually made this argument or if it was what seemed to be like the logical next step from her argument, but if we can't all use, or mostly all use, open source software, how open is it? I think that's a semi-legitimate question. This picture is really small. This is one of those, when you go to the theme park and there's the sign at the beginning of the line that says you must be this tall to ride this ride? We could use more of those, because right now we don't really have them. And at the amusement park, if the line gets really long, you're still going to wait for a while. But it's close to the start of where the line is, so that you don't stand for a really long time before you find that out. Right now we have things like Islandora and Hydra that are so cool, and they need a sign like this because there isn't one, and so it's the equivalent of you get in the line, you go through the whole line, and it's not until you try to get into the ride and strap in that you go, I can't ride this ride. It's not gonna work. So, and that kind of stinks because, I don't know how many other institutions got feeling ambitious and wanted to try software projects that it turned out weren't going to be feasible for entirely foreseeable reasons. I imagine there's probably a lot of that going around, but it just makes me sad to think about institutionally as a community how much time we could have saved ourselves. Beth Sadler talks a lot about us not reinventing the wheel by sharing more of our work, and I think this is kind of a version of reinventing the wheel. So that might be a place that smaller institutions can really give back. We can start writing the signs and joining in the community to write the documentation and saying hey, so we tried this and it turns out if you don't have a project manager or anyone who knows how to do project management, or if you don't have anybody who is a sysadmin and can do Linux, maybe you only have Windows servers, run away. Those are valuable things to know, right? Good news though. So continuing consortial work, again, it's not ideal, but it's so much better than trying to go it alone. This is not a smart-ass question. I don't know how feasible it might be for some of the bigger, arguably more successful institutions to maybe work a little bit in more formal sort of mentory relationships. I realize they're already giving a lot in terms of doing a lot of service, and also a lot of the big institutions are the ones who are devoting the staff time and resources to developing these projects in the first place. So that's a lot of work already, and it already feels, I'm sure, sometimes we just sort of come in at the end and, like I said, sometimes feels like smaller places aren't giving back so much. So I don't know how feasible it is, but it would be like we got so much, continue to get so much from just knowing that Michigan State is just an hour away from us, and we can shoot them an email when we get stuck, and if they can help, they will, and if they can't, they'll at least be really sympathetic. And that's been huge. So anything like that that can happen is all to the good. For us small institutions, I think I probably can speak for most of us when I say like we don't like that feeling that we're just sort of coming in at the end trying to use stuff and then whining about it. So like we should continue to be as open as possible. Like we're not just like whining to whine, like we want to help, we want to fix it any way that we can. We would like to, like maybe we don't have a GitHub account or don't know how to issue a pull request or aren't sure whether like a pull request or like labeling an issue would be like what's the etiquette. Maybe we don't know. But we would like to be helpful in some way, and we should continue to say that out loud. As far as I can tell so far, the best way to figure out for your institution if you can do a free and open source project or not is to corner people like us or people at bigger institutions who are using the software you want to use and ask them as point blank as you can, like, what do you think would be the deal breakers for trying to do this project? Like, what do you need? What have you discovered that, like, if you don't have it, it's really going to be difficult or impossible for you to do? What are the, until we get documentation that has maybe some more clear caveats right up front, what do we need to make sure that we can have a successful project? Because the people who do this stuff are really friendly and really helpful, and will always tell you in my experience. Other thoughts? So there are some free and open source software projects that many of us are using really successfully, right? Like WordPress and Drupal and MarkEdit, that we don't have this like huge barrier and huge difficulty with. And I realize that things like WordPress and MarkEdit have fewer moving parts than Islandora, and so there's a complexity issue, and that's, you know, what it is. But maybe there are things that we can take from the WordPress model or the Drupal model and apply towards the creation of free open source software projects that might be helpful. I was prepping my slides, and my buddy in IT pointed out to me that things like Mozilla have a foundation. So I don't know if that's maybe, as we continue to create these awesome, cool software projects for our community, maybe foundations might be a way to do it. I think, isn't ArchiveSpace? Is it ArchiveSpace or ArchivesMatica that has a foundation, I think? Sort of? I forget. I have to check. But we got the email like, hey, if you want to get in on the ground floor and be a developer partner and get support and stuff, that would be super. And I think that's a really cool model. So that might be something we can continue to try. And then I'm really curious as to what other people think. I am by no means any kind of authority. This is, you know, just my experience in the last year trying to do this. So, like, we should talk about this. What else could we try to make this easier for more of us? Questions, photos? Maybe.
Okay. What was the question? Never mind.
Does anybody have any thoughts, concerns, stuff I totally should have mentioned and didn't think of?
So I'm curious about, maybe this is, you don't have the answer to this. I'm Terrence from MSU, I don't have a name tag or anything. But communicating the stages of like, oh, this isn't working out how we had originally planned and pitched it. How has that gone? And like, do you have any tips around that process? So I'll fail it.
I guess the only tip I would say is if you're contemplating any kind of a free and open source software project that you think is maybe going to be kind of like bigger than installing WordPress, If you can read like as much project management material as you can get your hands on before you start, that would be super. We don't have like institutionally a ton of project management experience for this kind of project, certainly not in my department. And so what I have found is that those conversations have been really difficult for us to have, and they have not, I mean, I didn't feel like they went super well. Like nothing bad happened or exploded, but I walked away from several meetings thinking, well, that was like deeply unsatisfactory. And this is like one of my work projects that I have serious regrets about, and that's one of those things like it's hard to have those conversations if your boss doesn't know when to push back at you. And so if you suspect that you may not have institutionally like a lot of experience with this, as much as you can, like before you get into, I don't know how to use Linux or the command line or any of the technical stuff, the project management part is huge, I think, to learn how to have those conversations, because I don't think did it all that well. So it's been getting better, but yeah, regrets. But, yeah.
Have you found any support in working with like the Lone Rangers? That's the solo archivists kind of, or anything similar? Because I know that some special librarians kind of have similar issues too.
I think our archivist, I know she was in the listserv and on that group. I wasn't in that group. Maybe I should join them. The biggest difficulty we have is that honestly, like, we didn't even get to the part where her expertise and skill set would start to take over. We just were at the, like, can we install it and just make the software work the way it's supposed to? And the answer was no. So I feel like in some, like, Code4Lib is maybe the closest thing we have to a Lone Rangers more generally for a technical crowd, and so there's an extent to which I didn't even think to ask, because it was sort of I assumed like, well, I just did something wrong, so I have to go back and find it, and that's still a mental habit that I'm trying to get out of. So I don't know if that answers your question totally, but other questions? Yeah.
So you talked a lot about sort of the difficulty being a small institution, trying to take on really big projects. Do you have any advice for small teams or small institutions that are creating their own, say, small projects, but they're also sharing open source? What can we do to make them easier for other people to use?
I think one thing that maybe would be good as a community would be if we could have more conversation about testing. Like, I'm thinking about your talk that you just gave about telling people who don't do a lot of testing what you need from them if they're going to test your stuff. Because I think where we, speaking maybe as I shouldn't for other institutions, where I got stuck is like, okay, I downloaded your code from GitHub and I tried to install it and I can't get it to work. Or like, I can get it installed, but like nothing's happening or whatever. But then like, I'm not always as good as I feel like I should be at issuing a like help desk ticket or with a small team. And then we also, like, I want to respect your time. Like, I know everyone is super busy and has 85 things on their to-do list, and I don't necessarily want to become another thing on your to-do list if I totally could have just Googled that. So I think maybe like as a community, if we maybe could go on the Guide for the Perplexed page at Code4Lib. Like, if you're using open source software and it's not working out, maybe here are some things that, like, these are the kinds of things you should just Google, but like, or these are the kinds of errors that like we need to fix because we need to know about them. Like a big click moment early on for me was that everybody's server environment is different. It makes a big difference, it turns out. And sometimes you can do all the right things and it won't work because your server environment is different and you didn't know. So you can spend a while looking at some code trying to figure out where you did it wrong. and you didn't. And I don't know how to. That's not an easy one to solve. That's just an experience thing. But like a quick things you could check before you ask for help, or something might be good. I don't know. It's just a thought. And then like documentation, and that might be something that we can do. Like I'm a weirdo who actually likes writing documentation, so I don't know if how many others of us there are, but I actually kind of find it really satisfying. And so maybe that's a thing that we can really do. And I know it's a thing we should have done better. It's just sit down and instead of just like chugging through Ubuntu install after Ubuntu install, like every single step, we should have just written it down. In no small part because then we forgot what we did last time when we had to nuke it and start over. So that's a question. Thanks, guys.
It's very high security here. The password is on the laminated card. John, that's a good point. It is a capital W. If you have a laminated card taped to the desk, do you need a password?
So I am, here we go. Sorry, that is not what I wanted to do. Right. My name is Esther Rowe. I work at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and actually this talk kind of goes together well. Maybe Matthew planned this. It goes together well with Megan's talk because I work at one of the big institutions that is creating open source software. And we have a grant from Mellon that we're working with to do this. So this is the, and I just have to warn you, I just started this job 2 months ago. So I'm pretty much presenting about work that other people have done. And so if you ask me questions, I may or may not be able to answer it. So they've been working on this for about 2 years, but development just started in May. So this is the Chicago Collections Consortium. It's an organization of libraries, museums, whatever. We're trying to make a unified portal to be able to discover and research digital collections that have to do with Chicago. Right now, if you want to do that, then you have to go to each individual institution and search through whatever their system is, which they're all probably going to be different. Actually, we know they're all different, and they all have different descriptive standards and all this kind of stuff. So this taking this heterogeneous collection and making a single portal to be able to access all of it. And our target audiences go from serious archival researchers and down to Chicago students. In Chicago public schools, they all have like an assignment every year. They have to do like a research project on Chicago history, and they have to like find artifacts and things like that. So that's one of the major use cases. Sorry, one of the major use cases that we're targeting is trying to get this stuff available for students as well as researchers. Oh, one question. Are there any archivists in the room? Okay. Keep in mind, I am not an archivist. I'm also not a cataloger. So if I use any weird terminology, I'm sorry. I know that there are very specific things that you all say, and I don't necessarily always know. So these are our member organizations. It's pretty much all of the universities in the Chicago area, and than some of the museums. We have the Art Institute, the Chicago History Museum. Basically anybody who has this kind of archival collection. And I think they're open to new members. I think they just announced at our last meeting that there's a new member, which is either Northern Illinois University or Northeastern Illinois University. I can't remember, and it wasn't on the website, so I didn't put it. We're initially starting with just importing finding aids for finding aids for archival collections and digital images. We hope to, in later versions, we're going to extend to, hopefully video, audio, all those kind of things. But we're just basically starting with these kind of things, just as a starting point. We want full text searching of all of the EAD, the finding aids that we're providing. That means, regardless of the metadata, we want to be able to find them for the words that are in them. So our initial data includes 5,000 archival collections and 200,000 digital images. These numbers are actually kind of old. I don't know exactly how much they've changed, but that gives you an idea of the scale. And we are processing metadata in all of these different formats. And this is sort of one of the requirements that we came up with, was that the member institutions should not have to change their metadata or basically do anything to it. Whatever their product is the product that we're going to provide. So we have to figure a way to process all this and to homogenize it, basically, so that it means something to our system. The extensible text framework was chosen as our way to do indexing and searching. It's a Java application using Lucene. And you can have XSLT style sheets to customize how the searches are done and how the indexes are made. And you can actually have different style sheets and different sets of rules for different types of metadata. So it can process and index all of these different types that we're pulling in. And it also allows us to provide companion metadata files. So I'm going to talk a lot more about this later, but we can create these sort of standardized metadata files that go along with the heterogeneous metadata files that kind of tell you how to read that data. And the extensible text framework is open source. It was developed for the California Digital Library, and they maintain it. And so what we're doing is creating, one of the sort of negatives of XTF is that it basically has to be set up by a programmer. It's got all of this, you have to set up the directory structure and the style sheet so that it knows how to read the directory structure and it knows how to read all the different things, and you have to have access to the file system. We have 14 organizations, and we want people to be able, archivists in those organizations, to be able to upload their own data. We can't do it all, and they have to have access to the file system, all these kind of things. So our first step is to build this admin tool. So what we're doing is archivists, this will allow archivists to upload their own data. But because we are also creating these companion metadata files, they also have to be able to define how their metadata maps into the metadata that we want to create. So the first thing that archivists will do is map the XPath in their metadata to what we want our ultimate metadata elements to be. They're also allowed to map their descriptive tags, their subjects or coverage or whatever, to ours. There is another committee in the consortium that is the Controlled Vocabulary Committee, and they come up with a list of how we're describing this data. It's not Library of Congress subject headings. It's much simpler than that. It's meant to be sort of the facets within the search. And there are Chicago topics, which are kind of subject things. They're like architecture or, Crown Fountain. Then there are cities, so basically Chicago, Evanston, Skokie, the surrounding suburbs. And there are neighborhoods. And that, of course, is very contentious. What are the actual neighborhood names that we're accepting? Then there are some like proper names and things like that, which are slightly larger than those groups. But these are much, much simpler than the subject headings that most institutions have already put on in their metadata. So we're providing a way for them to map these very specific, complex subject headings into our more general, easily browsable headings. And then finally, we're making this an open source tool. We want anybody who's using XTF to be able to install this and use it as the way that they interact with their XTF system. Okay, I don't know how well you can read this. This is an example of some metadata. You can see on the top section there is the original metadata. This is from University of Chicago for this image here. And the image metadata, especially, I picked a very simple example, right? This is really just two levels. I didn't get into any EAD because those are crazy. And we found that the EAD, even though there's supposed to be like a standard, there's like guidelines for how it's done, every institution did it differently. And as far as image metadata may be done differently within the same institution for different collections. So you can see in the back is the original metadata that we have, and then in the front, this is an example of the companion metadata file that we're attempting to create. I'm going to go into a little more detail with this as we go. So the portal admin tool has these 5 modules: deposit, tag, connect, preview, and publish. I'm going to talk about each in a little more detail, though it's going to be sort of diminishing returns. I'm going to talk about a lot of detail about deposit because we've done a lot of development on that, and very little detail on the ones at the end because we haven't gotten there yet. We haven't dealt with all the issues. So deposit. In the initial setup of the system, there's this sort of idea of a portal manager, a person who, we get very confused with these terms, administrator and all these things, because we have there's so many different levels of admin. So we're calling the portal manager as someone who's not a programmer, but is pretty familiar with the sort of back-end database that we're building, because they're the ones who have to sort of set up the initial install and the tables that they're going to be using. So the portal admin can manage the XTF installations for various contexts. So we don't currently have a solid use case for this, but for example, there's another project in Chicago right now, the Black Music Resource Collection or something, the MRC. I don't know what the RC is. Anyway, but they're doing a similar project sort of at the same time as us. And the theory is that they could use the same installation of the portal admin tool to administer both the CCC, their CCC items, and their BMRC items, and they could write out to sort of different end portals. So we're kind of working with that idea in the background, but like I said, we don't actually have a partner that we're working with to do that in our initial install. So in the initial setup, there are some fixtures that are common regardless of the context, regardless of what portal you're writing for, and then there are some that will have to be defined in every context. So the DCXML formats are common to all contexts, and those are the XML elements that you're going to be writing to your companion DCXML files. Those are in the database, and they're defined for all contexts. The DigObject forms are, right now, they're just the archival collections and the digital images. If we extend it, then it would also be video, audio, whatever it is we're accepting. DigObject statuses, those are just saying what state is this in. So has it been imported, has it been tagged, has it been previewed, has it been published. Event types, the system keeps track of the history of all of these elements pretty in a lot of detail. Has it been rejected? Was there an error in the file? Did we import it? Did you tag it? Was there an error indexing? Those kind of things. So there's an event history. And then the user roles. So right now we're really only working with the 3 different user roles. We have the portal manager who has access to everything. Each site can have a site administrator and that which has access to everything at their site, and then archivists who can upload and create rule sets, but not much else. And then we have the fixtures that are specific to a given context. So these are things that make it this location as opposed to this portal as opposed to another portal. So the institutions can belong to more than one context, but they must be part of a context. Then your import rule set entry definitions. This is where it kind of gets complicated, because not only do you have to have an import rule set, but the portal manager has to define how we're going to collect the rule set. Because what questions are we going to ask the archivist as they're creating their rules? Because we're not asking archivists to learn XPath. So there has to be some way I'll get into a little more detail, but there has to be some way for the archivist to say, well, in this case, we only really need to ask about the nodes. We don't need to ask about any attributes. We don't need to ask about, is there a default value, whatever. So we're trying to have like the minimum number of questions when they're creating these rule sets possible. And so then the import rule sets are specific to the context, which are mostly created by the archivist, but the portal manager will probably create some generic ones to start as we set it up. And then finally the facets and trigger terms. So these are things that XTF, the facets are things that XTF understands and it uses for its display, and you can have faceted searches and things like that. And then the trigger terms are used to create the facets from the imported metadata. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so in creating the import rules, we have the DCXML formats. They tell us what are the DCXML elements that we're going to be writing out. Those, in theory, you should be able to change those, like in an open source context. And if they are just one-to-one mappings between the original metadata file and the DCXML file, like you just want to say, okay, my title field is here, and I just want you to take the title from this field and put it into the DCXML file just the way it is, then in an open source context, you can do that. You can create a new DCXML element, and they can create their rules for it. But there are also other fields that we are doing that sort of has special processors. They know sort of what to do with this specific type of element, because we're actually going to change it before we write it to the DCXML file. So that would, in an open source context, you would have to change the code in order to create something like that. So the profile fields, this is the questions that we're going to ask the archivists. And then, so I have some examples here. So these are just some wireframes. We have done some development on this, but it's not quite done yet. But so these different types of entry fields, they are all actually going to ultimately create the same result, but we're just asking the questions in different ways. Because, for example, in this one down here, we're asking for attributes. So we're saying that there might be an element where you have to specify a specific attribute in order to ensure that you're getting the right node. Whereas at the top for the title, the portal manager is anticipating that everybody's title is just going to be in a node, a single node that doesn't have different attributes separating it from other things. And then, for example, with the subjects, the way that we're writing out the DCXML files, you can't put more than one subject in a single XML element. But we know that some people do that, right? They use a delimiter they put, they put architecture, semicolon, something, I don't know. So they are allowed to define, yes, I'm going to have only a single subject element, but it's actually going to have n number of subjects in it, and they're going to be separated by this delimiter. But we don't want to ask them in other situations about delimiters because, if it's something like title, we know that they're not going to have an element that's like that, or we really, really hope that they don't. So this is a way that was designed to simplify as much as possible the process for the archivist, so that we can set up as much as possible beforehand. But at the same time, they have to be able to define how we're going to find the information that's in their metadata. So once they've created their rule sets, then they can upload their content. And in this process, it's pretty straightforward. As far it should work. They've already defined the rules. It should be able to pull out the information that they need. And archivists will then, if there are problem records, which there almost always are, there are records that are missing a required field, if there are, can't read the XML, whatever. Archivists are notified by email that provides an XML file that contains only the records that had problems in them, so that they can take that file, fix the problems, then put it back with their original metadata files and their images, whatever it was, re-upload it just the way it was without having to sort out which files it was or whatever. It just reads through their XML file. And the original files, when they do the upload, their original metadata files are stored within the XTF directory structure. So those will actually be indexed as well. So if there's keyword searches are done on them, it will find anything that's in that original metadata file, even if it isn't part of the things that we extracted for our DCXML files that are used for browsing and that sort of thing. So this is just an example of, you can see at the top, I sort of selected out of the original metadata file their elements that map directly to DCXML elements. So you'll see at the bottom, this is basically the companion file that would be generated if they did nothing else. They just did their import and then published it. And there's some institution information that we know about, and then there's things that were just translated directly from the original metadata file. And but you'll see that it doesn't really have any facets or subjects or anything like that, and that's because we have some tagging to do. Institutions have the option to opt in or out of auto tagging, which auto tagging would actually automatically happen after they do the import. And it would use these trigger terms that were set up by the CodeLib manager to map the subjects that they have into the subjects that we have. And the subjects that we have, like I said, are much simpler than Library of Congress subject headings. So it can do sort of basic logical functions like starts with or contains or things like that. So if someone happens to have architecture, Illinois, Chicago, or whatever it is, that can map just to architecture, because that's really what we're doing. And then we did provide the option of opting out, because not all of the archivists want you to just do that. but at the same time, we wanted to provide that option because there was worry that we were asking them to basically recatalog their entire digital collection, and they just don't have the capacity to do that. So we wanted to have sort of this balance between doing things for them and letting them do it themselves, however they feel most comfortable. So the archivist can browse and search by the original metadata, just the metadata that we've imported though to use in our DCXML file, not the entire document that they gave us. So this is just a quick example of, you can see the subjects that were in the original metadata file, and then you'll see the subjects, and these are subjects' names, geographic coverage that were created using tagging, and the words that we're going to use. And this file was actually generated by hand by our portal manager, just as an example, but this is, in theory, what would happen. And this is just some screenshots of the wireframes of how the tagging can take place. So you can sort of start from, you can see on the left is the list of the metadata that we've imported. You can sort of browse through there, pick what you want, and then select a bunch of tags. The last step before you get into publishing and indexing is connect. And that allows archivists to connect together items that they have imported. For right now, the most clear is connecting digital images to archival collections. So basically, if it's a digitized image of something that they have physically and they've uploaded the finding aid for that collection, then they can connect those digital images back to the finding aid that references their collection. And that's a pretty clear parent-child kind of relationship. What's less clear, we haven't totally worked out the design for it, is if archival collections can be connected to each other. We have this use case at UIC. There's some giant archival collection. They have, I don't know, it's huge, and they have 10 finding aids, 10 different finding aids that all refer to the same collection. And so it's Century of Progress, Volume 1, Century of Progress, Volume 2. And we're thinking about how would we connect those together. It's not a clear parent-child relationship, and then it has an ordering, and there's a lot more complication. And then when we were talking about this with the University of Chicago people and the Chicago History Museum people, they were offended that this even existed. They were like, why would you do that? So, we have not worked out exactly how we're dealing with that yet. And then finally, there's the preview and publish, and these are we're going to have two full sort of XTF environments where archivists can first preview, send it out without sending it to the public, and be able to see it in the context that in context with other items from other institutions, and then publish will be the engine behind the public portal. So our challenges have been, I think it's kind of basic standard stuff as far as balancing complexity with usability. What are we allowed to ask the archivist to do, and what can we do for them? And if we're doing it for them, are we kind of, because we want this to be open source, are we making it so specific to what we're doing by doing things for them? Is it going to be generalizable to an open source community? So, and a lot of things end up going back onto the portal manager, asking her to build more and more of these sort of these elements that live in the database all the time, and having her be the person who everyone contacts when they get errors, right? Because not only are we not asking them to learn XPath, but there is an assumption that at least some of the archivists have never even looked at their XML before. So how can we ask them to fix errors in their XML if they've never even looked at it? And a lot of times it goes back to, well, we'll just have Kate take care of it. You know, like they'll just ask her, right? And that's a lot of burden. And then it also makes it difficult in an open source context. It's like, yes, this project was able to hire a full-time person who is the portal manager, but that is pretty rare, right? So, you know, we're trying to figure those things out. And then finally, of course, it's just the fact that every time we look at a new collection, a new institution's data, we find that we actually haven't built it as general as we thought, and there's always problems. There's always problems with when we're bringing in new XML. So, like I said, we started development in May. We've come along a lot with the back end for the deposit, and we're starting to work on the front end. And so we're testing for deposit and tagging is scheduled in October this year, and then portal release is scheduled for next summer. So that includes the admin tool and the public portal, which I haven't talked about, but is coming. Just to note, we're hiring another developer. The position actually closes tomorrow, but if you know someone, I realized I made my whole slides and I didn't even mention what we're building this in. But we're building it in Django. It was a decision that was made before I arrived, but I'm not super picky, and I had experience with it, so it worked for me. But yeah, so we're hiring. If you know somebody who knows Django or doesn't mind learning it, and you think they'd be great, you know, pass this link along. Yeah, I think it's a really great project. It's really interesting for a programmer, and it's also really engaging for someone who's interested in, you know, archives and cultural institutions and that kind of thing. Just wanted to give a shout out to other people who really did all of this work. So this is the portal committee. Many of these people work for other institutions and the Devel team. And that's actually, I misspelled his name, it's Mike Weir. He's a consultant who's been working with us to get the deposit stuff worked out, so I will correct the spelling mistake. All right, and that's it. Have any questions? Oh, and sorry, that's my email address at the bottom, but I put sort of the general contacts for the project for the rest of it.
So once it's all finished, you would then begin working with the Black Music Collection, and sort of like, there'll be like a test case for like...
Well, I don't, okay, real answer is I don't know.
Sure.
But we don't have an official relationship with them.
Okay.
It's just that they're also in Chicago, and many of the same organizations that, you know, the same libraries that are partners with us are partners with them. So we kind of use it as our sort of talking point, but we don't have any official relationship to do something with them.
Sure.
So, I think one of the things you talked about a couple slides back was that kind of like, how do you decide how much you do for archivists versus how much do you let them do? Like, where is what you're doing making a job easier for them versus where is it like taking away control that they might want?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of a generalizable problem to most of what a lot of us do. Do you have any what's your gut check on that for a decision? Do you like run it by people? How do you, is it case by case?
Yeah, so, you know, I work very closely with two people who sort of have, you know, an outside view. There's Kate Flynn is the portal manager, so she's an archivist who was hired just to work on this project. And Tracy Seneca is the project manager, and she is a digital projects manager at UIC. So, I mean, I see them every day, and we discuss these kind of things. Then we also have the portal committee that we meet with every 2 weeks. So things kind of go back, and that has representatives from most of the institutions that we're working with. So, things get sort of bounced back to different levels depending on whether we think we can make a decision or not. Any more questions? All right, thanks.
So we still have 2 short talks, but I thought it was okay with the speakers. We take a quick break since lunch is being served here. We get some food, and get some fuel, and we can wrap up the last 2 talks during lunch. That sound okay to everybody? Okay. One thing that I'm gonna be running around during lunch to find all the folks who have presented, just because we recorded and streamed all the sessions, and we're going to put them up online, but our institution likes to have pieces of paper that people have signed that say, yes, you can do that. So I'm just going to run around and be official. And I filled out as much of the forms as I possibly could. So all you should have to do is actually sign. Just don't read too closely. I may be asking for bank account information. Voluntarily assume the risk of injury. So lunch is in the back, and we'll get started in a few minutes.
So does anybody know where the restaurants are?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Can I ask you for some yes?
Oh, so start off, you'll find something to prepare for dinner. You work sometime? Yeah, it's all
Hello, everybody. So we have two more quick talks here to wrap up during lunch. Continue enjoying the food, and I'm going to hand it over now to Dan, and we'll have Roy in a minute, and then we'll go on our field trip. So anyway, thank you again to everybody who came. Thank you again to the folks on the planning committee, Kyle, Kristen, Aaron, and Eric. Very nice to meet you. Thank you guys very much. Thank you. All right, so without further ado, thanks, Dan.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Wells. I'm from the Heckman Library at Calvin College here in Grand Rapids. And I'm here to tell you about what really amounts to just a simple little trick that I hope you might find useful in your daily work if you ever work with MARC files. So first, a brief history. In the beginning, we had cataloging, and unfortunately, our machines could not understand it. So way back in the 1960s, we created something called machine readable cataloging, or MARC, and we've dealt with it till today. But today, I am proud to introduce the next chapter in the history, which is, of course, human readable MARC, because MARC has problems. What are the problems with MARC? If you've ever tried to deal with it as someone who comes from a normal sort of system admin background, has lots of problems. You can't really grep it. You can't really diff it. You can't really edit it in a text editor. And you can't really read it. The main reasons for this, though, is really simple. It doesn't have lines. So, the solution, or at least a solution, is human readable MARC, which is just MARC with new lines. So how do you do it? You just use sed, and you simply replace the field terminator with new lines. It's very, very fast. Just to break this down a little bit, if you're not familiar with sed, it's the stream editor in Unix or Unix-like operating systems. So it should be on more or less every computer that's not a Windows machine. And then we're passing in an expression. That's what this E is. You don't actually need that since we only have one expression. It doesn't hurt to have it. And then that thing that looks like 2 carets isn't actually 2 carets. It is the way that at least some OSs represent this control character 1E, which we can type at least in Bash. I'm not sure if other terminals do it the same way. You might have to look up how to enter control characters in your own terminal. But in Bash, you just type Control V and then Control 6. And it appears on your screen like these 2 carets, but in fact, you've typed the field terminator for MARC. And how do you undo it? Yes, I did not spill coffee on my keyboard. This is a sed command. I won't pretend to know what it means, but it really amounts to treat the whole thing as a big blob of text again, rather than as lines, because sed, once it has lines, isn't going to see those new lines because those are going to get eaten up as it processes each line. So then we just basically turn our new lines back into these control characters, and it's a totally lossless process. So a quick, simple comparison of what this looks like. Here's a MARC record in all its glory. You see everywhere you see these 2 little carets. My Vim, at least in my terminal, highlights the control characters in white. So we know that, at least in some cases, these aren't even visible, but at least I can see them. But it has all the problems that I mentioned earlier. And here's what it looks like if we just simply replace the field terminators with new lines. It's so much more readable. I don't know if you can actually see it, it's kind of dim. But you know, I can see, I can have my author, I have my title, I have my subjects. It's infinitely more usable for humans and for many simple Unix program. So why do you use it? Well, it works with these normal line programs, script, if, vim, etc. I don't know if any of you have ever tried, just sort of accidentally, like, you edited a mark file, you ran it through some process to remove junk tags or whatever, and you're like, I want to see what it did. I'm just going to diff these files. And then it, confidently shows you the entire contents of both files on the screen, like, tell you what you already knew. Yes, they're different. But once you have the new lines, you can actually go through and see, like, you can see where it took out the tags and such. It's much more helpful. Same thing that I often encounter with Vim. I often just, sort of instinctively, I want to edit this file, hit VI, the file name, and Vim, sort of chokes because it's trying to look for a screen full of lines and it doesn't find it. And if you have, hundreds of thousands of records in your file, it just keeps turning and turning. And it will eventually open in most cases, but it's a huge pain to use. You can't, page around, etc. The sed command, like I said, is super duper fast. There's probably no program on earth faster than sed. I think you're basically limited by the speed of your disk. I did a few tests on a 300,000 record authority file, and it takes like 10 or 20 seconds, so very, very fast. And no special software needed, so this especially is good if you're in a pinch, you're on some system, you don't have access to Yaz or some other fancier way to actually convert this into something more readable. So just flip out this. And it feels like magic, so that's, we have this page at work, and some other projects have something similar, our magic spells page. So these things that are, sort of hard to remember, but they just do something that's so useful in such a short amount of work. So why not to use it? It is very cryptic. Obviously, you'd have to use it fairly frequently to remember those commands if you don't have easy access to some place where you keep such sorts of things. Probably the biggest drawback is that you can't really see the field numbers, because the field numbers are still just in the directory. The directory doesn't have any delimiters in it that we can usefully break it apart, and even if it did, they wouldn't be down with the data. But if you're familiar with the overall structure of the mark record, you can still tell where stuff is and can make reasonable guesses. You can still see the indicators, you can still see the subfields, but that is a drawback. You can't really see the field numbers. And why not use it? It feels like magic if you're not comfortable with magic things. Maybe you don't want to do this. So that's it. Anyone have any questions about this idea?
I completely understand where you're coming from, but you're going to break mark records if you edit them that way. Because you'll add caricatures, which is cool, and then you might add like a single character to a particular title field, and then you'll undo your wrapping thing, and then what you haven't taken into account is that in the first like 5 or 6 bytes of the marked record denotes the length of the record, and you've now added a character or two and unwrapped it and then not updated the leader part, and you'll break them. I understand where you're coming from. Really, I do.
Yeah, this is all true, and I probably should have mentioned some of that.
It's easy, good for reading them. What you got is a great thing for reading them. Not real cool for editing.
But if you do that and then you do whatever diffy stuff and then mess it up with the other said one-liner, will it still, I don't know, will that fix?
No.
As long as you haven't changed the length of the record, it is a lossless process.
Yes, you have it right. Or added in the field, but then you would change the length of the record. Yeah.
There are, I'll just leave it at that.
And the
it's mostly for
such, there's specific
peering into the file
for end of field, end of subfield, and end of record. That's explicitly what they are in ASCII.
Alright. Thank you.
no idea what that question mark button's for. Do I need to do anything while I'm there? Oh, do I have to do the function thing for remote display?
Yeah.
We can talk about that. That's better. Interesting juxtaposition of speakers. And that was an interesting solution to some of the things, and I've got a different way of doing things, so it will both work out. Start with a few non-marked things. I know we have people of varying technical abilities in this room, and one of the things you can do in the system is you can redefine the ls command, which I've always wanted to stay away from. But what I did end up doing is I created my own command, which gives me a screen full of the newest files in the current directory. And if you have a different size terminal session, you normally use this change the number there to however many lines will work for you. So it's simple, but it's pretty handy. And something that we found useful is what jobs have you scheduled that are running or have already run today? This will read your cron tab file for whatever your current user is. It'll interpret it and it'll show you stuff in order starting from midnight and going up to the next midnight pretty much. And when I originally wrote it, it interpreted all the contents in our cron tab files, but actually I realized later on that it doesn't cover all the syntax. It'll work with most of it. And you can also apply an arbitrary date, so based on the current contents of your cron tab file, it'll say what may have run on a previous date or what is likely to run on a future date, assuming no changes from the current contents. Last fall we had a need of figuring out how long certain jobs ran. And so we started doing that. So it's easy to tell when it started, because that's in your cron tab file, but how do you know when it ended? Well, if you have log files that your jobs create, the timestamp, the OS timestamp on your log file will show you when the file was last updated, so that is the time the job stopped running. And so if you have a consistent setup in your production environment like we do, all our cron jobs put their log files in M1 local cron logs. I mean, obviously you can put it wherever you need it, but as long as it's consistent, then you can have cron logger point at that, and then it'll do the interpretation and figure it out for you. And we run it at the end of the day, so they'll get everything that ran that day, and their sample output. And we keep a running log of everything, so if we have look what ran on a particular day and how long, then we have a record of it. Okay, the rest of the talk's going to be just about Mark utilities, because I said messing with Mark. They all run in Perl. None of them need any additional modules installed. And as you may or may not know, Perl can also be installed on Windows machines, and so all these utilities would also work on a Windows machine, not just on a Linux, Unix machine. And for the ones that we use a lot, we also have a wrapper shell script, which is pretty much just the line you see right there. So rather than saying /Perl program and the arguments, it's a little bit more intuitive to say, like a command is program run kind of a thing with the parameters. I wrote this a couple of years ago, so I found out it'd be nice to know for a particular kind of a condition how many records might have that particular condition, or which records meet your specs, and then pull out a copy of those records. And Mark Reader can do that for you, and it's very flexible. You have choices of matching on record length, either greater than or less than, pull out all those records that match that from the leader. Or for the certain leader positions where it applies, match up the contents in that position, look for that kind of stuff. You can also match on field, specifying a field. You can optionally use the indicator values, and of course the field data, and similarly for subfield. And for subfields, you can also say where the data will match either starting with, ending with, or just containing that data. And you can mix and match all this stuff. And also for field and subfields, you can specify it will be the very first match in a particular record. Sometimes you have more than one occurrence. Any match, or must it match all, or only the last one. Sometimes that makes a difference. And of course, matches can be case sensitive or not, whatever you want to do it. And you can again mix and match inverse logical knots of what you want to look for. You can give a complete spec and say everything that doesn't match everything I just specified, or just invert certain parts of it. So it's quite flexible on that. Sounds a little bit complicated. You can create the INI file that controls this manually, of course, as the text file. But, and I've even found myself using this because it's so much easier, use a self-config option. It'll ask you a bunch of questions, and then you answer it, and it'll create the INI file for you. And for larger files that I think are like over 10,000 records or something where it starts to make sense, you can optionally have a % progress indicator. For shorter files, it's not worth the bother. Originally I thought Mark Reader was going to replace Mark Search, but then Mark Reader only works with one file at a time. Whereas Mark Search can use one or more files. You can give it a wildcard spec even. And then output will be either, you can count you either count the occurrences of the string you're looking for in that particular file, like say file X count, file Y count, and so forth, it delineates that. Or you can say for each of those files that you're looking through, if it has it, it'll give you the 001 field to identify the record and the particular field that contains that string. So actually they are a little bit complementary, Mark Reader and Mark Search. I wrote this is probably one of my first utilities, long before I knew that Terry Reese's Mark Edit even existed. And also before I knew that the Perl modules existed. Or maybe I consciously ignored it at the point, I don't know. Like I say, none of this requires additional modules. It's a batch Mark file editor that we use quite a bit in our various load jobs and stuff for pre-processing. So you can add or delete fields, or you can filter out by certain records, delete records, and then the edit list is there for predefined functions. It's just an arbitrary set of functions that we over time have needed. And so that's why we've got that implemented. Unicode split is the one that's a little bit different because that'll look at the one leader character and give you two output files depending upon Unicode or not. It doesn't do any other checking, just based on that. And Mark Edit also goes by an INI file, like in one of our load jobs, we've created I think 7 or 8 different INI files. It defaults to the default name, or you can specify a particular INI file name and just keep on calling it in turn and do whatever you need to do. And that's proven to be quite useful. Split mark, straightforward. Splits mark files. Just give it a mark file input name and the output file name template and how many records max you want to have per output file. Every once in a while that was kind of useful, but it got kind of tedious if you wanted to get like a certain numbered record out of a file, and I'll get to that in a minute. Then this would work, but it'd be really, really tedious. I always wanted to think of mark F2R as field to record. It never makes sense, actually file to record kind of thing. You can specify by one or more record IDs, pull out these records from the specified mark file. So that's useful. And what I was alluding to, it was still a bit earlier, is mark nth. Going by the number of the record in the file, like the 4th record or whatever, or pulling out the 4th through 8th records of a mark file. You can do that with this. And output is either in the raw usual mark format or in human readable mark read format. And since we often use mark read, it'll optionally also work with mark read format, human readable mark files as input. Straightforward. How many records are in a mark file? And mark read. And this is a typical output from mark read. You see the leader delineated there, and then for each field you've got field ID, the length of the field, and you offset in the record. And then for the field 10 on, I think it is, you've got your indicators. And as here you got the indicators, and then yeah, there's no space here. There's your subfield indicator, subfield identifier, and the space and the contents. And any subsequent subfields in the record will be space, or delineator, if you will, and identifier, and another space with data. Now, one of the things that we can do is we will run our mock file through Mark Reed, because you can put the output into file rather than STD out, and then grep on that and do various things, and that works. But then we found out that, I found out that Mark Reader actually works better in certain cases for something like that. And I don't know why I didn't think of this a long time ago, but it wasn't too long ago that I thought of Mark Unread. But you saw the format that we just have here. Well, that's really just a text file. There are no binary characters in there. So if you run your Mark file through Mark Read and get the output into a file, you can edit it with whatever text editor you want to edit with and make the changes. And since I have that right on here, you only want to make the changes in the data part, of course. You can make changes in this section. Remember, this is now a text file, but Mark Unread will ignore that. So they'll just look at this here, rebuild it, and take care of that for you. So you can make the changes and save it, and then Mark Unread will change it back for you. It is a little bit up to you to observe Mark's syntax. Mark Unread will do a little bit of checking, but I didn't want to put a whole bunch of effort into that. And so that's a nice way of being able to do marked edits. And this is not directly marked, but I wrote this way back when we were still on mainframe with Notice, and since I've ported it to Perl. I used to call it the Perl, or the call number sorting, but it really is just a normalization thing. And it's fairly simple to use. And for this one, you do need to be a Perl programmer to use it, because it goes right inside your program. That's the way it's designed. So for every group of things that you want to sort by call number, you pass the call number to the C and parse function that's in the little library there, because there's a few other functions in there too that are like helpers. And it'll return an array of normalized call number parts. And then you and your program kind of stringify it to just really, if you will, a serialization. You just take all the elements of that array and stick it at the very beginning of an element in your unsorted array, and it can concatenate whatever else you want sorted on there. So each of this is one element in your array that you call sort. And then when you get your sorted array back, you drop these normalized call number parts, and you've got your sorted data, whatever that data that is. And that really is it. That's where you can get the files. This is my end screen, so if anybody wants that, write it down or ask me. And if you have further questions, there's my email address. That's it. You were first.
We have a question actually from the internet, from Francis, who is watching the live
stream.
Oh,
okay.
And he says, any chance you can throw that up on Bitbucket or GitHub, and our pull requests welcome. Any of your tools?
I have no idea, because like some people here, I've never used GitHub yet.
Okay.
I use Git a little bit at home, but strictly in a private way.
Yeah.
That's why way back when I put these stuff on the website. You just go in there and get them.
Okay.
It's that simple. Yeah, right.
Just wanted to point out that quietly on the social media back channel, everyone was going crazy.
Wow.
Started going on.
That's kind of interesting, because in the Voyager world, which is the ILS we're still on right now, I would generally announce it when I wrote something like that, so they would know about it, but I never announced it like in Code4Lib or anything. I just never really got around to it. But they've always been out there. If you happen to look for it, you might have found it, kind of thing. But yeah, that's why Matt suggested that I talk about this, and so I just kind of threw it together real quick. Like, it's not really polished, but I guess it worked out.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Well, that's it for programming for this year's Code4Lib Midwest. Thank you again, all of you, for coming. We're going to get ready to carpool over to the site visit. I hope all of you can join us. Is everybody planning on coming? Okay.
If you need a ride, if you want to drive, you are welcome to leave from there. It's not far from here. It's what, maybe a mile and a half, Eric?
Yeah, it's not very far.
It's not very far, but a little too far to walk.
Yeah.
But we do have some folks who have room in their cars. I've conscripted John's. You have 3. Did we?
Yeah. So
okay.
3 comfortably, potentially 4.
I have 3 comfortably, potentially 4. Primarily only for people who are comfortable sitting on Cheerios. Since I'll be car seats out of the way to fit you.
I've got the institution van, so I can drive people if somebody will navigate, and if everybody wants to come back here or something, or stay there.
Okay. So we've got a lot of seats, and I think Kristen's got some seats, and Eric said he's also got some seats. So
everyone have directions?
There are directions sort of in your badge. The map unfortunately doesn't quite extend all the way there, but it's fairly easy. If you look for the one street that is red, it's called Century Lane, and we can sort of caravan over there. But you turn down, is it Century Lane?
Yeah,
That's a bowling alley in my hometown.
Actually, the sign says Ellsworth, and it turns into